Hi guys, and welcome to History for Calm Nights. Tonight we slip quietly through a narrow Victorian street where the stones are always damp and the air smells faintly of coal smoke and boiled cabbage. You stand outside a small brick house, the kind you have probably walked past 100 times without noticing, and tonight you finally step inside. You probably will not survive this if you expect comfort, privacy or silence. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights. You push the door inward, and the sound it makes is not a creak so much as a tired sigh. The handle is cool under your palm, polished smooth by decades of hands that looked a lot like yours, except rougher, cracked, and permanently darkened by work. The moment you cross the threshold, the outside world fades. The street noise dulls. In its place comes a low hush, broken by distant coughing. A kettle somewhere nearby, and the muffled footstep of a neighbour you will never see, but always hear. This house is smaller than you imagined, much smaller. A mainstream historical fact, often mentioned in surveys of 19th century cities, is that millions of working families lived in homes with only 1 or 2 rooms, even as industrial wealth exploded just streets away. Standing here, that statistic suddenly has weight. You feel it in your shoulders, in the way the ceiling presses down, visually, making you instinctively lower your voice as if the room itself is listening. The air is warm but not fresh. It carries layers of smell-old smoke soaked into the walls, damp wool hanging to dry, something vaguely sour that you cannot quite place. It is not unpleasant exactly, just constant. You realise this is what people mean when they say a house smells lived in. The walls are close enough that you could stretch out both arms and almost touch them. The wallpaper, once patterned, now fades into a tired blur, lifting slightly at the corners, where moisture has crept in over the years. As you take a few careful steps forward, your foot brushes grit on the floor. Coal dust tracked in again and again, ground so fine it has become part of the house itself. There is no hallway in the modern sense. You are already in the main room, the centre of everything. Cooking happens here. Eating happens here. Washing happens here. Sometimes sleeping happens here too. Historians still argue whether families thought of these rooms as cramped or simply normal, shaped by expectations that were never allowed to grow larger. Your eyes adjust slowly to the light. It comes from a small window at the front half obscured by grime and a thin curtain that does little more than signal modesty to the outside world. The glass distorts the street beyond bending shapes into something dreamlike. On winter mornings, this window sometimes grows a lace of frost on the inside, not the outside, a small detail that tells you how thin the barrier is between warmth and cold. There is furniture, but not much. A table squats near the centre, scarred and uneven, its surface bearing the quiet record of countless meals, arguments, and exhausted elbows. Chairs cluster around it, none of them matching. One leans slightly, as if it has given up on being straight. Another has been repaired with a strip of wood that does not quite fit. A quirky tidbit sometimes mentioned in personal diaries from the period is that families would name their chairs, joking, about which one might finally collapse next. Humour, it seems, fits even in the smallest corners. You become aware of sound again. The house is never silent. Somewhere behind a wall, a baby fusses. Above you, a floorboard creaks as someone shifts their weight. Through the wall to your left, a man clears his throat. The kind of deep practice sound that suggests years of breathing dust and smoke. Privacy here is not about being alone. It is about learning which noises belong to your life and which belong to someone else's, and pretending the difference matters. The floor beneath your boots is uneven, worn into shallow dips by generations of feet, pacing the same paths, from door to table, from table to hearth, from hearth to bed. You can almost trace the routine with your eyes. Morning begins with movement toward the fire, hands reaching out before the body is fully awake. Evening ends with bodies retreating inward, folding themselves into corners, where sleep can happen despite everything. You notice how the house seems to lean slightly forward, as if bracing against time. These buildings were thrown up quickly to meet demand, often without the care given to homes meant for wealthier families. Brickwork hides shortcuts. Timber beams do more work than they should. Yet here it stands, still standing. There is a quiet resilience in that one you feel even if no one ever says it out loud. Your breath slows as you take it all in. You are not rushing. There is nowhere to rush to. This house has its own rhythm, and you sense it beginning to pull you in. Outside, factories roar and carts rattle, but inside, life compresses. Everything essential is within arm's reach. That closeness shapes people. It sharpens tempers sometimes. It also forges a kind of intimacy that modern walls and doors, rarely allow. As you pause near the table, your fingers brush its edge. The wood is warm from the fire nearby, faintly sticky from old spills polished smooth over time. You imagine hands resting here at the end of a long day, knuckles swollen, nails rimmed with black. You imagine conversations held in low voices, worries about rent, about work tomorrow, about whether the weather will turn. Those worries do not announce themselves loudly. They hum beneath everything, like the house itself. You realize standing here that this is not a museum scene. It is not frozen. It is alive, breathing quietly around you. The door behind you does not lock out hardship. It simply gathers it inside and makes it manageable, one small space at a time. And as the light flickers softly against the walls, you feel yourself settling, ready to move deeper, ready to see how life unfolds when this room becomes the center of an entire world. You remain standing for a moment, letting your eyes travel the room again, and only now do you fully understand that this space was never meant to feel generous. It was meant to function. The room does not invite you to relax so much as instruct you where to stand, where to sit, and where not to linger. You shift your weight slightly instinctively, keeping to the narrow path that generations before you have worn into the floorboards. This is a room designed for survival, not for display. Every object earns its place by being useful. Nothing here exists simply to be admired. A mainstream historical fact often noted in housing records is that Victorian working-class homes were built with efficiency in mind, squeezing as many families as possible into tight urban plots. Standing here, that efficiency feels less like clever design and more like quiet pressure, a reminder that space itself was a luxury you could not afford. Your gaze settles on the far corner where a narrow bed frame sits close to the wall. During the day, it barely looks like a bed at all. A blanket folded just so makes it pass for a bench or a storage surface. At night, it transforms. Bodies will stretch out here, sometimes two, sometimes three, arranged with care and compromise. Historians still argue whether families preferred sleeping in one shared room, or if this arrangement was simply unavoidable. But either way, the result is the same. Sleep becomes a collective act. Near the bed, a small chest crouches low to the floor. It holds clothes, personal items, maybe a letter or two tied with string. You can imagine it being opened carefully, not because its contents are precious in value, but because they are precious in scarcity. Space inside the chest is as limited as space in the room, and deciding what belongs here is its own quiet ritual. You take a step toward the table again and notice how its position controls the flow of the room. It is not centered for symmetry, it is centered for access. From this spot you can reach the hearth, the door, the bed, and the storage chest without taking it more than a few steps. This is intentional. When you're exhausted, when the light is low, when your hands are full, you do not want to navigate, you want to reach. There is something almost comforting in how predictable everything feels. The table will always be here. The chairs will always be tucked close, ready to be pulled out and pushed back in. A quirky tidbit, occasionally mentioned in oral histories, is that some families arranged their furniture based on superstition, believing certain layouts brought better luck or kept illness at bay. Whether true or not, it reveals something important. Control, even symbolic control, mattered deeply when so much else was uncertain. You run your hand along the wall and feel its texture. The plaster is uneven, patched in places where cracks have been filled and filled again. It is cool to the touch, faintly damp. This dampness is not dramatic. It does not drip or pool. It simply lingers, a quiet presence that seeps into clothing and bones alike. You understand now why people here are so aware of weather, why rain is never just rain and cold is never just cold. The ceiling feels low, especially near the edges where it slopes slightly. Taller visitors learn to duck without thinking. Children learn quickly where they can jump and where they cannot. The house teaches you its rules early. You obey them not out of fear, but because ignoring them hurts. A bumped head, a bruised shoulder, small punishments for inattention. You notice there is no clear boundary between work and rest. The same table where bread is cut will later hold mended socks. The same chair that supports a tired body in the evening will hold a child standing on it in the morning, reaching for something just out of grasp. Modern ideas about separate rooms for separate purposes feel distant here, almost indulgent. Light shifts subtly as a cloud passes outside. The room darkens, then brightens again. This change feels more significant than it would in a modern home. Light here is a resource measured and noticed. When it fades, tasks slow or stop. You begin to sense how time itself feels different in a space like this. Hours are shaped by light, by fatigue, by the needs of others in the room. You imagine a morning here, someone rises first, careful not to wake everyone else. They move by memory, knowing exactly where the table edge is, where the chair leg sticks out, just enough to catch a shin. They reach the hearth and coax life back into yesterday's ashes. The room warms slowly, reluctantly, and with it the day begins. At night the reverse happens. Activity contracts inward, voices soften, movements become economical. There is no wandering off to private corners. Everyone shares the same air, the same warmth, the same exhaustion. You begin to understand how arguments flare quickly here, and how reconciliation must follow just as quickly. There is nowhere to storm off to. There is only this room. Historians still debate whether such close quarters strengthened family bonds or strained them beyond repair. Standing here, you suspect the answer is both. The room magnifies everything. Love feels louder, anger feels sharper, silence feels heavier. Yet within that intensity, routines form. Habits take root. Life continues one small adjustment at a time. As you step back toward the center of the room, you feel less like a visitor and more like part of the pattern. Your movements slow, matching the space. You are learning its logic, its limitations, its quiet resilience. And without realizing it, you are already preparing to see how this single room must stretch itself to hold every need, every season, every story still waiting to unfold. As you settle deeper into the room, the smell becomes impossible to ignore, not because it grows stronger, but because you finally stop resisting it. Coal smoke clings to everything here. It sinks into fabric, seeps into wood, and settles invisibly on skin. You breathe it in with every slow inhale, and after a while you stop noticing it consciously. That is how people survive it. They let it become normal. A mainstream historical fact, often mentioned in studies of industrial Britain, is that coal was the primary domestic fuel for working-class households, burned daily for cooking and warmth. This simple fact shaped entire lives. You feel it now as a faint dryness at the back of your throat, a reminder that the fire never truly leaves this room, even when it is not burning. The hearth sits low and blackened its bricks dark with years of use. Ash gathers in the corners, no matter how carefully it is swept. Soot dusts the surrounding wall in a soft grey halo, like a permanent shadow. You can tell where the fire burns hottest by the deeper staining, where heat has slowly altered the surface over time. The hearth is not decorative. It is practical, scarred, and utterly essential. You imagine the ritual of lighting it each morning. Paper scraps, bits of wood coal added carefully so as not to waste a single piece. The first crackle of flame is more than sound. It is reassurance. It means warmth will come. It means tea will be made. It means yesterday's cold has not won. The fire becomes the room's pulse, rising and falling with the day. The smell shifts subtly depending on what is burned. Cheap coal produces a sharper tang, almost metallic. Better quality fuel, when it can be afforded, burns cleaner and smells softer, though never truly clean. Sometimes scraps of wood find their way into the fire, adding a brief sweetness before disappearing into smoke. A quirky tidbit, found in some personal letters from the era, mentions that children could tell what kind of day it would be by how the house smelled in the morning, whether the fire had been lit quickly or hesitantly. Your clothes begin to feel heavier as you stand there. Not physically heavier, but saturated. Wool absorbs smoke readily, holding onto it like a memory. Even hair is not spared. You realise that people carry this smell with them, wherever they go. Into factories, into shops, into churches. It marks them as surely as accent or clothing. There is no escaping it, and perhaps no desire to. To smell of coal is to belong. Historians still argue whether Victorians understood the long-term health effects of constant smoke inhalation. Some believed the air thickened the lungs and made them stronger. Others quietly suspected it did harm, but saw no alternative. Standing here, breathing slowly, you understand how abstract health concerns must have seemed compared to the immediate need for warmth. The air is rarely still. Heat from the hearth causes it to move in slow currents, carrying smells upward and outward. Near the ceiling, the air is warmer, heavier. Near the floor, it is cooler, sometimes damp. Children learn quickly where to sit to stay warm. Older bodies gravitate closer to the fire, drawn by aching joints and stiff fingers. You notice how surfaces closest to the hearth are smoother, polished by constant contact. The edge of the table near the fire is darker, the wood grain filled with soot. Even the floorboards nearby are worn differently, marked by the repeated presence of feet seeking warmth. The room records behaviour without anyone ever intending it to. At night, the fire changes character. It is no longer busy and bright, but subdued, glowing softly under a layer of ash. Its light flickers across faces, turning expressions into shifting masks. Conversations slow, shadows stretch and shrink with every movement. You imagine stories told here, not loudly, but in murmurs, punctuated by the pop of coal and the sigh of settling embers. The smell of coal never fully fades, even when the fire dies. It lingers into sleep, mixing with the smell of damp blankets and unwashed skin. For someone raised in this environment, it is comforting. For an outsider, it might feel oppressive. But here, it is simply the smell of home. You realise that when people step outside after a long evening indoors, the night air must feel sharp and clean by comparison, even when it is thick with industrial smoke. The contrast alone would be enough to make the outside feel bracing, almost shocking. Inside, the air wraps around you, familiar and unchanging. As you breathe in slowly, you sense how deeply this smell weaves itself into memory. Long after leaving this room, long after the house itself is gone, the scent of coal will be enough to bring it all rushing back. The cramped space, the low ceiling, the shared warmth, the quiet endurance. You shift your stance slightly closer to the hearth and feel its gentle heat against your legs. It anchors you, keeps you present. And as the fire crackles softly, you understand that this smell, this constant presence, is not just a byproduct of life here. It is one of its defining features, shaping days and nights alike as you move ever further into the rhythms of this home. You lean back slightly and notice the walls more closely now, not just as boundaries, but as surfaces that quietly react to everything happening inside this room. They do not simply stand still. They absorb, they release, they respond. The plaster feels cool and faintly clammy beneath your fingertips, as if the house itself is breathing slowly in time with you. Moisture is everywhere, though rarely dramatic. It does not drip from the ceiling or pool on the floor. Instead, it lingers. It seeps in from the ground, creeps through brick, and settles into plaster with patient determination. One widely accepted observation from housing inspectors of the era noted that damp was nearly universal in working-class dwellings, especially those built quickly during rapid urban expansion. Standing here, that observation feels less like a report and more like a sensation that settles into your bones. The wallpaper tells its own story. What was once patterned with flowers or geometric shapes now appears faded and bruised, lifting slightly where paste has failed. In some spots, the paper has been peeled back and replaced with mismatched patches chosen not for beauty, but for availability. The wall beneath shows through rough and uneven bearing the marks of past repairs. Each layer suggests an attempt to improve things, or at least to keep them from getting worse. You begin to notice faint, dark blooms spreading near the corners and along the lower edges. Mould, quiet and persistent, it does not announce itself loudly. It simply exists. Tolerated because there is little choice. Some families scrub it away regularly, others let it be. There is a subtle line between cleanliness and futility that everyone here understands instinctively. A lesser-known detail recorded in personal letters mentions that some households believed damp walls could make you dream more vividly at night. Whether this was superstition or simply the effect of poor air and heavy sleep is unclear, but it shows how people searched for meaning in conditions they could not change. The house was not just shelter, it was an influence. You feel how temperature clings differently near the walls. In winter, cold seems to radiate inward even with the fire burning. In summer, the walls hold heat, stubbornly releasing it, slowly long after the sun has gone down. There is no escape from the seasons here. The house does not insulate so much as delay. Researchers still dispute whether Victorians recognised damp as a serious health hazard or simply accepted it as an unavoidable part of urban life. Some medical voices warned of its dangers, linking it to coughs and weakness. Others dismissed such concerns, pointing instead to moral behaviour or personal constitution. From inside this room, those debates feel distant. What matters is that the walls are cold and you adapt. You notice how objects are kept slightly away from the walls when possible. Furniture legs rest a few inches out, leaving narrow gaps where air can move. Clothes are never hung directly against plaster if it can be helped. These small habits are learned early, passed down without explanation. You do them because everyone does, because not doing them makes things worse. At night, when the fire dims and movement slows, the walls seem to grow closer. Sound travels strangely, through damp surfaces, muffled yet intimate. A cough echoes softly. A whispered conversation carries just far enough to remind you that you are not alone. The house feels full, even when everyone is still. You imagine rain falling outside, soaking into brickwork, already heavy with moisture. Inside, nothing visibly changes, yet you sense it. The air thickens, the walls cool further, blankets feel heavier. Sleep becomes deeper, but more restless. Dreams come and go, shaped perhaps by the quiet pressure of the space itself. You run your hand along the wall, once more slower this time. It is not hostile, it is simply tired. Like everything else here, it has been asked to do more than it was meant to, and yet it continues, holding up ceilings, keeping out most of the weather, offering what protection it can. As you step back toward the centre of the room, you feel an unexpected tenderness for these walls. They witness everything. Joy, illness, birth, arguments, grief. They absorb it all without comment. And as the fire flickers gently behind you, you sense that the house is not just containing life. It is quietly shaped by it, breath by breath, night after night. Your attention drifts naturally toward the furniture, now not because it draws the eye, but because it quietly defines how life unfolds in this room. Nothing here is accidental. Each object has survived because it earns its keep again and again. You quickly sense that furniture, in a working-class Victorian home, is not about ownership so much as endurance. The table comes first, as it always does. It is thick and solid, scarred by use rather than age. Cuts in the surface mark where bread has been sliced directly on the wood. Dark rings show where hot pots were set down without thought for appearances. This table has never known a tablecloth for long. Fabric stains too easily, and washing is too much work for something purely decorative. One commonly cited observation from social reformers of the period was that working families often owned fewer than a dozen major household items. Standing here, you realise how intensely familiar each one must have felt. Chairs gather around the table like tired companions. None match, and none are particularly comfortable. One creaks loudly when you shift your weight. Another leans just enough to keep you alert. Comfort is not the goal here. Stability is. Chairs are moved constantly, pulled close to the fire, in winter pushed aside, during cleaning, repurposed as step stands or makeshift cradles. You imagine a child being warned not to rock too hard, not because of manners, but because repairs take time and money no one has to spare. Against the wall, the bed frame waits quietly. During daylight hours, it does its best to disappear. Blankets are folded tight pillows, stacked neatly, turning it into a bench or storage surface. At night, it becomes something else entirely. Sleep is negotiated here. Who lies where? Who gets the warmer spot? Who curls inward to make space? Scholars still debate whether such arrangements affected sleep quality long term, or if bodies simply adapted, but adaptation is clearly part of the design. Nearby, a narrow chest holds more than possessions. It holds decisions, what to keep, what to mend again, what might be sold if times grow harder. The lid opens stiffly, its hinges complaining softly, and you can imagine the familiar sound being enough to wake someone half asleep. Inside, clothes are folded tightly, sometimes layered with paper to absorb moisture. Letters, if there are any, are tucked carefully away, read and reread until the paper thins. A small shelf holds odds and ends, a chipped mug, a tin for tea, a few mismatched utensils. Nothing is thrown away unless it is truly beyond saving. A curious detail recorded in some household accounts mentions that broken furniture was often kept for years, dismantled piece by piece, to be reused as firewood or repair material. Waste here is unthinkable. Everything has another life waiting. You notice how little floor space remains once furniture is accounted for. Paths are narrow, intentional. You step carefully, already learning where to place your feet without thinking. At night, this knowledge becomes instinct. You can move through the room in near darkness, without collision, guided by memory rather than sight. The furniture carries sound differently too. When someone sits down heavily, the vibration travels through the wood and into the floor. Everyone feels it. When a chair scrapes back conversation, pauses briefly, acknowledging the interruption. Silence here is not empty, it is shared. In moments of illness, furniture rearranges itself again. Chairs pull closer to the bed. The table shifts to make room. Blankets multiply. The room transforms without complaint. Nothing resists being used in new ways. Flexibility is built into every object by necessity. You run your hand along the table edge, once more feeling its familiar curve. Generations of hands have worn it smooth. Children have traced it absent-mindedly while listening to adults talk. Tired workers have leaned on it, gathering strength before standing again. It holds the weight of daily life without ceremony. As you step back and take it all in, you realize that this furniture does not ask for attention. It asks for trust. It will hold you. It will support you. It will adapt. And in return, it will never be beautiful, never impressive, never admired by strangers. But here within these walls, it is enough. The room feels fuller now, not because anything has changed, but because you understand it better. The furniture is not clutter. It is infrastructure. It allows life to happen in a space too small for comfort, but just large enough for survival. And as the fire murmurs softly nearby, you sense that every scrape, every wobble, every worn surface is part of a quiet agreement between people and the objects that carry them through each long day. You find yourself drawn back toward the hearth again, almost without thinking, as if the room itself is gently steering you there. Everything seems to orbit this spot. The fire is not just a feature of the room. It is its anchor, its heartbeat, the one thing that gives shape to the day. When the fire is strong, the house feels alive. When it weakens, everything else slows in response. This is where mornings begin. Someone crouches low, knees stiff, coaxing embers back to life with careful breath and patience. The first flame is always watched closely. It matters more than clocks ever could. Once it catches the room, warms unevenly, but faithfully heat radiating outward in soft waves. Only then does the day feel possible. One well-established observation from 19th century domestic life is that the hearth served as the primary source of warmth cooking, and even light in working-class homes, a single point of dependence that shaped daily rhythms. You stand close enough now to feel the fire's warmth against your shins. It is comforting, but never indulgent. The heat must be shared and space near the hearth is valuable. Children hover here in winter toes, creeping ever closer until someone scolds them gently back. Older hands stretch toward the flames, fingers stiff from cold, and work absorbing warmth, as if storing it for later. Cooking happens here too, with movements learned through repetition. A pot hangs or rests, nearby its contents, simple and familiar. Boiling, simmering, stretching ingredients as far as they will go. The smell changes as food cooks, briefly overtaking the scent of coal. For a moment the room smells of broth or tea or bread warming, and that small shift is enough to lift spirits. People notice. They always notice. Evenings belong to the hearth in a different way. After work, bodies gather closer, drawn by habit as much as need. Conversation settles into a low hum. Faces glow softly in firelight lines deepening. Expressions gentled by shadow. You imagine someone rubbing tired eyes, another leaning forward with elbows on knees, hands extended toward the heat. Silence is allowed here. It does not feel awkward, it feels earned. There is a commonly repeated detail in household accounts that the hearth was often the cleanest part of the room, despite constant use. Ash was swept carefully. Tools were kept in order. This was not about appearances, it was about respect. Disorder here meant wasted fuel or dangerous sparks. The fire demanded attention and gave warmth in return. You notice the tools nearby, a poker darkened and bent, tongs with uneven grips, a small shovel for ash. Each one bears signs of long service. Handles are smoothed by hands that have reached for them thousands of times. Children learn early not to touch these tools without permission. The fire teaches boundaries swiftly and without mercy. Some families hang small objects near the hearth, not for decoration, but for meaning. A horseshoe, a scrap of ribbon, a faded image. These are not displayed proudly. They are placed quietly, meant to watch rather than be seen. There is an old belief mentioned occasionally in folklore collections that the hearth protected the home from misfortune, and that keeping certain items nearby helped strengthen that protection. Whether believed literally or not, the act itself offers comfort. Researchers still debate whether the emotional importance of the hearth was consciously acknowledged by Victorian families or simply absorbed through routine. From where you stand, the answer feels obvious. When the fire falters, anxiety rises. When it burns steadily, the room relaxes. Mood follows flame. At night, the hearth shifts again. It becomes softer, quieter. Embers glow under ash, releasing warmth, slowly, carefully rationed until morning. Someone checks it before sleep, nudging coals into place, ensuring it will survive the night. There is satisfaction in this small act. It means less effort tomorrow. It means continuity. You imagine lying down with the fire still breathing quietly, its warmth reaching you, even at the edges of the room. Shadows dance lazily across walls and ceiling. The sound of crackling fades into background noise, joining breathing, distant footsteps, the occasional cough. Sleep comes more easily with these sounds present. Silence, when it happens, feels wrong. The hearth also witnesses moments of strain. Arguments flare here, voices rising briefly before dropping again. News is shared here, good and bad. Decisions are made with faces lit unevenly by flame. The fire does not judge. It simply burns steady and indifferent, reminding everyone that warmth must be maintained regardless of emotion. You step back slightly, giving the hearth its space, and notice how the room feels different when you do. Cooler, quieter, less grounded. It is subtle but unmistakable. This is the centre whether anyone names it or not. As the fire murmurs on, you feel the room settle around it. Furniture angled just so, bodies instinctively arranging themselves in its orbit. You understand now that the hearth is not just part of the house, it is the house in many ways. Everything else exists in relation to it. And as you stand there, letting the warmth soak in you, sense how deeply this simple source of heat has shaped not just routines but relationships, memories, and the very feeling of safety itself. The fire burns low and steady, and with it the quiet assurance that for tonight, at least the room will hold. As the fire settles into a steady glow, your attention shifts to something you had barely noticed until now, the way light behaves in this room. It is not abundant, it never spills freely. Light here is measured, guarded, and quietly rationed, much like everything else. You become aware of how your eyes constantly adjust, widening slightly, learning to read shapes and movement in half shadow. During the day, the small window does most of the work. Its glass is uneven, warping the outside world into soft distortions. Sunlight arrives reluctantly, filtered through soot grime and thin fabric. Even at noon, the room never feels truly bright. Instead, it glows faintly, as if the light has grown tired by the time it reaches you. Records from urban housing surveys frequently noted that working-class interiors were chronically underlit, a simple architectural choice that saved space but changed how people lived hour by hour. As afternoon fades, the question of light becomes immediate. Someone reaches for a candle or an oil lamp with care that feels almost ceremonial. These are not struck casually. A flame costs money. It must earn its keep. The wick is trimmed carefully. The lamp is placed where it can illuminate the most without being knocked over. You sense the quiet calculation behind every movement. The light it provides is warm but limited. Shadows deepen quickly beyond its reach. Corners blur. Faces nearest the flame glow softly while others recede into darkness. Conversation naturally pulls inward, closer together, voices lowering without conscious effort. You realize how much modern lighting has trained you to spread out to occupy space freely. Here, light gathers people. A small but telling detail found in household advice manuals mentions that some families timed their evening tasks precisely to avoid using extra candles. Mending might wait until morning. Reading, if it happened at all, was done quickly and close to the flame. Children learned early that asking for more light was asking for money to be burned. You notice how light changes the mood of the room. In brighter moments, there is energy, motion, conversation. As the flame dims, everything softens. Movements slow. Words become fewer. The room seems to breathe out, preparing for rest. Darkness is not feared here. It is expected, embraced even. There is a practical intimacy to this darkness. You become more aware of sound, of warmth, of the presence of others. A chair scraping softly feels louder. A cough draws attention. Even breathing becomes something you notice your own and everyone else's. The dark compresses awareness, narrowing focus to what truly matters. Experts continue to disagree about whether limited artificial lighting affected productivity or health in significant ways, but standing here, you suspect its emotional impact was just as important. Darkness encourages stillness. It invites reflection. It also demands trust. You move carefully, guided by memory rather than sight, confident that the room will be where you left it. The flame flickers slightly as air shifts. Shadows ripple across the walls, making them seem alive, almost liquid. Children sometimes watch these shapes with fascination, inventing stories, tracing figures that vanish as quickly as they appear. Adults glance up occasionally, then back to their thoughts, finding comfort in the familiar dance. At bedtime, the light is extinguished with intention. There is no drifting off with lamps glowing unattended. Someone leans forward, pinches the flame, or turns the wick down slowly. Darkness floods the room, immediate and complete. For a moment, there is disorientation. Then the room reasserts itself through sound and touch. You imagine lying down in this darkness, eyes open, at first adjusting. The fire's embers, provide the faintest glow, just enough to outline shapes you already know by heart. The darkness feels thick but not threatening. It wraps around you, signaling that the day is truly over. Outside, the city continues, but inside, the night has claimed its territory. Light will return in the morning, gradually and imperfectly, just as it always does. Until then, darkness rules gently but firmly. As you stand there letting the dimness settle, you understand that light here is not taken for granted. It is valued precisely because it is scarce. And in its absence, something else fills the space. A quiet awareness, a shared stillness, a collective pause that makes sleep feel not just possible, but necessary. As the room settles into its dimmer evening rhythm, you become aware of something else that has been present all along. Sound, or rather the way sound refuses to stay where it belongs. The walls around you are thin, both in construction and intention. They divide space, but they do not isolate it. Life leaks through them constantly, reminding you that this home is only one cell in a tightly packed body. You pause, listening. A chair scrapes somewhere to your right, not in this room, but close enough to feel familiar. A baby fusses through the wall, the sound softened yet unmistakable. Footsteps pass overhead, slow and careful, as if the person walking knows exactly where each board will complain. You are never fully alone here, even when the room is quiet. Contemporary observers of Victorian urban housing frequently noted how closely families lived together, often separated by little more than a brick wall or thin wooden partition. From the inside, that observation becomes a lived experience. Sound does not knock before entering. It simply arrives, woven into the fabric of your evening. Voices are the most constant presence. Conversations drift in fragments. A laugh rises briefly, then fades. An argument flares muffled, but sharp enough to be understood without words. You catch the rhythm of speech, more than the content, the rise and fall of emotion, travelling easily through shared structures. Over time, you learn to identify your neighbours by sound alone. There is comfort in this, though it may not seem like it at first. The noises tell you that others are awake, working, resting, surviving. Silence, when it comes, feels heavier than noise ever does. A sudden absence of sound might prompt concern. Is someone ill? Has something gone wrong? Noise reassures in ways that quiet never quite manages. A curious detail mentioned in several memoirs describes children falling asleep to the cadence of neighbouring households, soothed by voices they never saw. The walls acted like a lullaby, carrying murmurs, coughs, and distant movement that signalled normalcy. You can imagine how unsettling true silence might have felt in such a place. You notice how people adapt their behaviour to this acoustic reality. Voices are lowered not out of courtesy, but out of habit. Certain topics are discussed carefully or postponed until the noise of cooking or fire crackle can mask them. Privacy becomes a matter of timing rather than space. You wait for the right moment rather than the right room. At night, sounds change character. Daytime activity gives way to slower, heavier movements. Someone climbs into bed above you. Springs creak. A whispered exchange drifts downward, intimate yet unintended for your ears. The building itself seems to settle, responding to the collective shift toward rest. Scholars continue to disagree about whether this constant auditory exposure strengthened community bonds or eroded personal boundaries. Standing here, listening without trying, you sense that it did both. You know your neighbours' routines, their habits, their moods without ever exchanging words. That knowledge can foster empathy or irritation, often at the same time. The sounds also carry reminders of work, boots being kicked off, tools set down, a tired sigh that needs no explanation. Even if you never see where someone labours, you hear the evidence of it returning home. Work follows people inside, not just in dirt and smell, but in sound. Occasionally, laughter breaks through, sudden and bright. It catches your attention immediately because it is rarer than noise. It signals relief, a momentary lifting of weight. You smile without meaning to, even if you do not know why they're laughing. Joy, like hardship, travels easily through walls. You also hear illness, Coughs linger longer than they should. Breathing turns laboured. Someone groans softly in the night. These sounds are not ignored. They are noted, filed away mentally. Tomorrow someone might check in, or not. Awareness does not always translate into action, but it shapes how you feel about the space you share. As you stand quietly, you realise that listening is an active skill here. You learn which sounds matter and which can fade into the background. You tune out the constant murmur while remaining alert to changes. It is a delicate balance, one learned early and rarely articulated. Even the building itself contributes to the soundscape. Pipes knock faintly. Wood contracts with temperature changes. Wind pushes against the structure, finding gaps and seams. These sounds become familiar companions, as recognizable as the furniture or the hearth. When sleep finally comes, it does so against this backdrop. You drift off not into silence, but into a layered chorus of life continuing around you. The sounds do not keep you awake. They hold you there, suspended between your own thoughts and the knowledge that you're part of something larger, whether you wish to be or not. As the night deepens, the noises soften, thinning out, but never fully disappearing. Somewhere someone turns over. Somewhere else someone dreams aloud. The walls carry it all faithfully, impartially. And as you let yourself relax into this shared quiet, you understand that these sounds are not intrusions. They are evidence, proof that the world beyond your small room is still breathing, still moving, still enduring alongside you, one thin wall at a time. As the sounds around you soften and thin attention drifts naturally toward the most intimate arrangement this room must manage each night. Sleeping here is not a solitary act. It is shared, negotiated, and quietly choreographed. You begin to sense how bedtime is less about retreating from the world and more about carefully fitting into it. The bed you noticed earlier now reveals its true importance. It is narrow, its frame plain, its mattress thin and uneven. Straw or horsehair shifts beneath weight, never quite settling the same way twice. One broadly accepted reality of Victorian working households is that multiple people often shared a single bed, sometimes entire families compressed into one sleeping surface. This was not an emergency measure, it was routine. As night deepens, bodies gather. Someone claims the wall side, first seeking the illusion of protection and warmth. Another settles near the edge, careful not to slip off in sleep. Children are placed strategically tucked between adults, where heat is strongest and movement gentlest. Each position is chosen with thought, even if no one says so aloud. There is a rhythm to it. Shoes come off first, placed neatly, to avoid morning confusion. Clothes are loosened, but rarely removed entirely, both for warmth and modesty. Blankets are shaken once, then layered carefully, their weight distributed so no one feels shortchanged. You notice how everyone waits, adjusting silently, until the collective arrangement feels acceptable. The air grows warmer as bodies settle close. Breath mingles. The smell of coal smoke, damp wool, and human presence deepens, becoming almost sweet through familiarity. You feel how warmth here is communal, something generated together rather than individually controlled. It is efficient, practical, and oddly comforting. A small but striking detail found in some 19th century court testimonies mentions that people could identify family members by breathing patterns alone in the dark. Listening now, you understand how that might be true. Each person brings a distinct cadence, a quiet signature that becomes as recognizable as a face. Sleep itself arrives in stages. At first there is restlessness. Someone shifts, another sighs. A whispered comment passes between adults, too soft for children to hear clearly. Then movement slows. Breathing evens out. The bed seems to exhale as tension leaves it. Privacy here is redefined. It does not mean being unseen. It means being understood and ignored at the same time. You are aware of every body near you, yet you learn to look inward, to carve out a small mental space where sleep can happen. This skill is learned early, honed through necessity. Historians continue to question whether shared sleeping increased emotional closeness or simply reflected economic pressure. From within this bed, the distinction feels blurred. Closeness is unavoidable. Affection, irritation, patience, and fatigue all exist side by side. There is no room for prolonged resentment. Morning will come too quickly. Occasionally, someone wakes in the night. A child murmurs. An adult shifts carefully, trying not to disturb the delicate balance. The bed responds to every movement, springs creaking softly, straw rustling. You learn to move slowly, deliberately, as if the bed itself were a sleeping creature. Dreams are influenced by proximity. You sense warmth, hear breathing, feel the subtle rise and fall beneath you. Sleep feels deeper, heavier, perhaps because waking fully would require too much effort. Even discomfort becomes part of the landscape, accepted rather than resisted. On particularly cold nights, the bed becomes a refuge. Blankets are pulled tighter, bodies press closer. The fire's last warmth reaches only faintly, but the shared heat is enough. In summer, the opposite challenge appears. The room grows stifling. Sweat gathers. Sleep becomes lighter, punctuated by small adjustments and whispered complaints. Still, no one suggests separating. Space is not an option. Scholars have long debated whether such conditions affected long-term health or sleep patterns, but inside this room, those debates feel abstract. What matters is rest, however imperfect. Tomorrow's work does not wait for ideal conditions. Children learn from this arrangement early. They learn awareness, restraint, and empathy. They learn how to exist in close quarters without demanding constant attention. Night becomes a lesson as much as a necessity. As you lie there, eyes closed or half open, you sense how the room holds everyone in place. The walls, the furniture, the bed itself all work together to contain sleep, however loosely. Outside, the city murmurs on, but inside, the world has narrowed to breath and warmth. Eventually, even your thoughts slow. The shared rhythm lulls you. You drift not away from others, but alongside them. Sleep arrives not as an escape, but as a gentle agreement between bodies, sharing limited space and unlimited fatigue. And as the night stretches on, you realize that in this room, rest is not a solitary luxury. It is a collective achievement reached, together one careful adjustment at a time. Morning arrives quietly, not with sunlight pouring in, but with a subtle shift in the room's temperature and sound. Someone stirs, a blanket moves. The bed exhales its shared warmth back into the cooler air. You become aware of clothes again, the garments you slept in, and the ones waiting nearby, never quite dry, never truly clean, but essential all the same. Clothing here is not an expression. It is equipment. Wool skirts, coarse shirts, heavy stockings, all chosen for durability rather than comfort. A widely recognised aspect of working-class life in the Victorian period is that families owned very few changes of clothing, often wearing the same garments day after day. As you pull a shirt over your head, it feels slightly stiff, holding the memory of yesterday's labour and last night's smoke. Dampness is the constant companion. Even when clothes have been hung near the fire, they rarely dry completely. The air does not allow it. Instead, warmth drives moisture deeper into fabric, leaving garments heavy and faintly sour. You notice how people test clothes with practiced fingers, gauging whether they are dry enough to wear without comment. Dry enough is the standard, perfect is unnecessary. The smell of clothing blends seamlessly with the room. Smoke, sweat, soap, residue, all layered together. It is not offensive, it is familiar. These smells mark belonging. When someone steps outside, they carry the house with them. When they return, they bring the street back inside, adding new layers to fabric that will not be washed for days, sometimes weeks. Washing clothes is an event, not a routine. It demands time, fuel, water, and strength. On ordinary mornings, you simply choose the least damp garment and move on. There is an unspoken understanding that everyone looks much the same. Appearances are managed collectively. No one expects crispness. They expect effort. You notice repairs everywhere. Elbows reinforced with darker patches, hems let down and stitched again. Buttons replaced with mismatched substitutes. A small but telling detail recorded in household inventories shows that sewing kits were among the most valued possessions, even in the poorest homes. Clothing was not discarded lightly. It was negotiated with coaxed into lasting longer. As you dress, you become aware of how clothes feel against the skin. Wool itches, seams rub, stockings sag slightly as you move. Over time, bodies adapt, skin toughens, awareness dulls. Discomfort becomes background noise noticed only when something changes. A new tear, a missing button, a sock worn thin enough to feel the floor beneath. Children dress quickly, often with help. Hands tug and straighten, movements efficient from repetition. There is little room for vanity, but there is pride. Clothes are brushed off, hair is smoothed. Even here, respectability matters. It is not about impressing others. It is about holding on to a sense of self in circumstances that rarely reward it. Observers of the era often remarked on how working-class families managed to appear cleaner than their conditions allowed. Standing here, you understand how much effort that required. Clothes are aired when possible, spots are scrubbed out by hand, wrinkles are ignored. Cleanliness becomes relative, defined by intention rather than outcome. Scholars still dispute whether constant damp clothing contributed significantly to illness, or whether other factors played a greater role. Inside this room, those distinctions blur. You feel the chill that clings to fabric, even near the fire. You feel how long it takes for warmth to reach the body. You move anyway. Work does not wait for comfort. As the day progresses, clothes change function. Sleeves are rolled, aprons tied on, skirts tucked up. Garments adapt to tasks, becoming barriers against dirt and heat. By evening, they will hold the evidence of everything done: crumbs, ash, grease, sweat. There is no place to change before sitting down. Clothes bridge every part of the day. At night, garments are loosened but rarely removed completely. The effort of undressing fully and redressing in the morning is often not worth the loss of warmth. Clothes become part of bedding, layered for insulation. You feel how the line between daywear and nightwear dissolves. Everything serves multiple purposes. Occasionally something new enters the room. A coat handed down from a relative, a pair of boots acquired second-hand. These arrivals are noted, touched, admired quietly. Newness is rare enough to be meaningful. The item is examined for durability, first beauty, second. You notice how clothes carry memory. A stain recalls a specific day. A patch reminds someone of a long evening spent mending by firelight. These garments are not just worn, they are lived in. They witness the ordinary struggles of each day without complaint. As you finish dressing and step back into the room's rhythm, you feel how clothing here does not separate you from the environment. It connects you to it. Damp walls, smoky air, shared warmth, all find their way into fabric and stay there. You carry the house with you, stitched and scented into every layer. And as the morning continues, you understand that these clothes are not meant to impress history. They are meant to endure it. They do their job quietly, absorbing the weight of work and weather alike, just as the people wearing them do day after day without pause. By the time clothes have absorbed another morning of movement, your thoughts drift toward the work that keeps them in rotation. Laundry here is never a small task tucked neatly into a schedule. It is a full event anticipated with a mix of resolve and quiet dread. You feel it approaching long before it happens, in the stiffening of fabric, the deepening of odours, the way garments seem to sag with accumulated days. Washing does not happen often, and when it does, it reshapes the entire household. A commonly acknowledged reality of 19th century working homes is that laundry was done infrequently because it required fuel, water time, and strength, all of which were in limited supply. Knowing this, you understand why people tolerate smells that might seem unbearable now. They are not signs of neglect, they are signs of calculation. When laundry day arrives, it begins early. Water must be fetched, carried in heavy buckets that strain arms and backs. Each trip is measured. Too little water and the effort is wasted. Too much and energy is gone before the work truly begins. The room fills with steam as water heats, adding another layer of moisture to air already thick with it. Soap is simple, harsh, and sparingly used. Clothes are plunged, scrubbed, twisted, and beaten against boards or stones. Hands redden quickly, skin cracks, nails fill with grit. You feel the repetitive rhythm in your shoulders as garments are worked again and again, coaxed towards something resembling cleanliness. Perfect results are never expected, improvement is enough. A curious observation found in some household guides notes that people often judge laundry success by smell rather than appearance. If the sourness faded, the job was considered done. Stains might remain, fabric might stiffen, but the worst of the odour would lift, at least temporarily. Cleanliness here is practical, not aesthetic. As clothes are wrung out, water drips onto the floor, darkening boards already stained from years of similar efforts. There is nowhere ideal to hang garments. Lines are strung across the room. Chairs are repurposed as drying racks. Clothes are draped near the fire, turned carefully to avoid scorching. The room transforms into a maze of damp fabric, forcing everyone to move more slowly, more deliberately. The smell during this time is intense. Wet wool releases everything it has absorbed. Smoke, sweat, dirt all bloom into the air at once. It is overwhelming at first, then strangely familiar. You breathe shallowly, without thinking, adapting as people always do. By evening, the smell will soften, settling back into its usual background presence. Children are often tasked with small parts of the process, carrying lighter items, turning garments, watching to make sure nothing slips too close to flame. These tasks are not framed as chores. They are simply part of living. Participation is expected, learned through observation rather than instruction. Those who study domestic life still question whether the physical toll of laundry contributed significantly to chronic fatigue among working-class women. From inside this moment, the answer feels obvious. The work is relentless. There are no shortcuts. When the last garment is finally hung, there is no celebration. There is only exhaustion and the knowledge that the cycle has merely reset. As clothes dry slowly, they stiffen, losing softness with each wash. Fabric weakens. Repairs become inevitable. The sewing kit comes out again. Patches are added. Tiers closed. Laundry day bleeds into mending without pause. You notice how work here rarely ends cleanly. Tasks overlap, merge, and spill into one another. By nightfall, some clothes are dry enough to wear. Others remain damp heavy with retained moisture. Choices are made. Someone wears a slightly wetter shirt, so another can have the drier one. These decisions are made quickly, often wordlessly. Fairness here is flexible, shaped by age, health, and tomorrow's demands. The room eventually returns to its usual order. Lines come down. Chairs return to their places. The floor is wiped as best it can be. The air cools. The familiar scent returns, layered once more, but muted. Laundry day leaves its mark not just on clothes, but on everyone involved. As you sit and rest, muscles aching, you feel a strange satisfaction beneath the fatigue. Something necessary has been accomplished. Clothes will last a little longer. Comfort, however limited, has been restored. This work, invisible to history books, sustains everything else. And as you lean back, letting the fire warm you again, you understand that laundry here is not about achieving freshness. It is about maintaining balance, holding decay at bay for just a little while longer, accepting that smells will return, dampness will creep back in, and the cycle will begin again soon enough. For now, though, the work pauses. The clothes hang quietly, steaming faintly in the low light. The room breathes, and you allow yourself to do the same, knowing that in this house, endurance is measured not in grand achievements, but in small victories, repeated endlessly. As the last damp clothes are moved aside, and the room regains its familiar shape, your thoughts turn naturally toward the next inevitability. Food. Not the kind imagined in abundance or variety, but the kind that keeps the body upright and moving through another day. Meals here are not events. They are quiet negotiations between hunger money and endurance. The table becomes active again, not dressed or decorated, simply cleared enough to work. Bread appears first, dense and dark, its crust firm, beneath your fingers. In many working households of the 19th century, bread formed the backbone of daily nutrition, eaten in some form, at nearly every meal. It is filling, reliable, and cheap enough to stretch across a family without comment. You break a piece and feel its weight. This is not airy bread. It demands chewing. It sits heavily in the stomach, which is precisely the point. Hunger is something to be subdued, not indulged. Alongside it, there may be dripping scraped carefully from cooled meat fats saved from previous meals. It melts slightly when spread, adding richness without requiring fresh ingredients. A kettle rattles softly near the hearth. Tea follows bread closely, not as luxury, but as necessity. The hot liquid warms hands and stomach alike. It also disguises the taste of water that may not always be pleasant on its own. You notice how mugs are held carefully, passed slowly, treated with more respect than their chipped edges might suggest. Meals are simple because they must be. A pot may hold broth thickened with barley or potatoes, perhaps flavoured with onion when available. Meat appears rarely and in small quantities, often stretched across several meals through stews and gravies. A well-documented aspect of urban working diets is their reliance on repetition. The same ingredients, cycling endlessly with minor variation. Variety is replaced by familiarity. You sit and eat without hurry, not because there is leisure, but because eating quickly offers no advantage. The room is warm, the fire is steady. This moment is as good as it will get for a while. Conversation, if it happens, stays low and practical. Plans for tomorrow. Complaints about work. Observations about weather. Food keeps mouths busy and thoughts grounded. A lesser-known detail mentioned in some factory workers' letters describes how people judged a meal not by taste, but by how long it delayed the return of hunger. As you eat, you understand this logic. Satisfaction is measured in hours, not pleasure. The meal does its job if it carries you through until the next one. Children eat alongside adults, learning quickly to accept what is given without fuss. There is no separate menu, no accommodation for preference. Taste is shaped by availability. Over time, the familiar flavours become comforting, even welcome. A meal that tastes exactly as expected offers reassurance in an unpredictable world. Scholars still dispute whether nutritional deficiencies were fully understood by working families or simply endured without explanation. From inside this room, the question feels secondary. People notice weakness, fatigue, illness. They respond by eating more, when possible resting when allowed. The language of vitamins and balance does not exist here, only the language of getting through. After the meal, there is little ceremony. Plates are scraped clean, crumbs gathered carefully. Nothing edible is wasted, even hardened bread is saved, soaked, later repurposed. The table returns to its other roles without complaint. It will soon hold mending paperwork, or simply tired elbows resting in silence. You notice how eating draws people closer together physically. Chairs angle inward, bodies lean toward the centre. The act of sharing food compresses the room further briefly, intensifying its sense of togetherness. When the meal ends, that closeness lingers for a moment before dispersing. Occasionally something different appears. A piece of fruit, a bit of sugar, a scrap of meat larger than usual. These moments are noted quietly. Eyes brighten. Portions are adjusted carefully. Such changes break the monotony, just enough to be memorable. Later, someone might recall that day as a good one, simply because the food was better. As the evening wears on, hunger begins to recede, replaced by heaviness and warmth. The fire crackles softly. The room grows quieter. Eating here is not about celebration, but it creates a subtle shift nonetheless. Bodies relax, movements slow, the day's sharp edges soften. You lean back slightly, feeling the table's worn edge against your ribs, and realize how deeply food structures the rhythm of this home. It dictates when people gather, when they pause, when they push on. It is not glamorous, not varied, but it is dependable in a way few things here are. Later, as darkness thickens and light is rationed again, the memory of the meal lingers. Not its flavour, but its effect, the steadying of nerves, the quiet reassurance that for tonight, at least hunger has been answered. And as you sit there listening to the low sounds of the house settling around you, you understand that food here is not meant to delight. It is meant to sustain. It does that job faithfully meal after meal, anchoring lives that have little room for excess but a great need for continuity. The pot will be scraped again tomorrow. The bread will be broken again. The kettle will boil again. And each time, the ritual will repeat modest and unremarkable, quietly keeping everything else possible. The meal settles into you, slowly, not with pleasure exactly, but with a steadying weight that makes the room feel calmer. Bread and tea have a way of doing that. They do not excite the senses, they quiet them. You feel your shoulders drop a little as warmth spreads outward from your stomach, and for a moment the house feels almost gentle. Bread here is not a side, it is the foundation. Thick slices rest directly on the table, their dark crumb dense enough to leave fingerprints when pressed. You notice how everyone handles it with familiarity breaking, rather than cutting when knives are dull or simply unnecessary. Crumbs scatter and are immediately gathered, brushed into a waiting cloth or cupped palm. Nothing edible is left behind. Dripping follows bread as naturally as shadow follows light. Saved carefully from previous cooking, it waits in a small container near the hearth, semi-solid and pale. When spread, it melts into the warm surface, adding richness without extravagance. There is satisfaction in this thrift, in making something substantial from what might otherwise be discarded. A widely acknowledged detail from household budgets of the era is that fats were treasured not for flavour alone, but for the energy they provided in physically demanding lives. Tea arrives in mugs that bear chips and cracks without apology. The liquid is dark and strong, brewed to stretch leaves as far as they will go. Sugar, when present, is used sparingly. You notice how the mug is cradled between both hands, as much for warmth as for comfort. The steam rises gently, carrying a faint bitterness that cuts through the heavier smells of the room. This combination appears again and again. Morning, evening, sometimes both. Bread and dripping, bread and tea. Bread alone when supplies run thin. It is predictable, but predictability has its own quiet comfort. You know what you are getting. You know how it will make you feel. A small but revealing note appears in some personal diaries where workers wrote longingly about white bread, describing it as soft and light, almost unreal. Dark bread, the everyday kind, was seen as sustaining rather than desirable. Yet over time, that dense loaf became associated with home, with endurance, with being fed rather than indulged. Preference reshaped itself around necessity. Children learn the ritual early. They tear bread carefully, spreading, dripping with a practiced hand that avoids waste. Fingers are licked quickly, discreetly. There is no shame in enjoying food, but enjoyment is quite contained. Eating is purposeful. It fits into the day like everything else. The table bears witness to countless repetitions of this scene. Its surface holds faint grease marks that never fully disappear, even after scrubbing. These marks are not cleaned away completely, because they always return. The table becomes a map of meals passed layered invisibly into the grain. Experts still debate whether such repetitive diets led to long-term nutritional imbalance or whether sheer caloric intake mattered more in sustaining labouring bodies. Sitting here, you sense how the body adapts to what it is given. Hunger dulls, taste narrows. Satisfaction becomes functional rather than sensory. Occasionally the routine shifts slightly. A scrape of cheese appears. An onion is sliced thinly and shared. A spoonful of jam turns an ordinary piece of bread into something memorable. These moments are noticed immediately. Conversation pauses. Portions are adjusted with care. No one comments openly, but everyone registers the change. You observe how food controls time in this house. The kettle boiling marks a pause. Bread on the table signals a gathering. The end of a meal signals transition, a return to work, mending, or rest. Meals do not punctuate the day, they organize it. As you sip tea slowly, the warmth spreads upward, loosening tightness in your chest. The bitter edge wakes you slightly, but not enough to disrupt the calm. This is not a drink meant to energize. It is meant to steady. You notice how people linger over the last few mouthfuls, not wanting the moment to end too quickly. There is also an unspoken social order embedded in the meal. Adults eat first or most depending on circumstance. Children are fed generously but practically. The elderly are watched quietly to make sure they're eating enough. These adjustments happen without discussion. Care is woven into habit. Some historians have questioned whether the emotional significance of such simple meals has been overstated in retrospect. From within this room, eating bread and tea together feels undeniably important. It is one of the few moments when everyone is still, when hands are occupied, but minds can rest. After the meal, crumbs are collected carefully. The table is wiped with a cloth already stained beyond hope. The mugs are rinsed quickly, water splashed and poured away, without ceremony. There is no lingering at the table, unless there is work to be done there next. Eating is complete. The room moves on. Yet the effect remains. Bellies are full enough. Spirits are steadier. The fire crackles softly in approval. You lean back slightly and feel the weight of the day settle into your body in a way that feels manageable. Bread and dripping may not sound like much from a distance, but here they are anchors. They arrive reliably, even when little else does. They do not surprise, but they do sustain. Over time, that reliability becomes something close to comfort. As the evening stretches on and light grows scarcer, the memory of the meal lingers. Not the taste, but the assurance it provided, the knowledge that hunger has been quieted for now. That tomorrow the same ritual will return, offering the same modest promise. And as you sit in the soft dimness, listening to the low sounds of the house settling again, you realize that in this home food does not need to be exciting. It needs to be there. Bread on the table, tea in the mug, enough to carry everyone forward into another night, another morning, another day that will look much the same and still require just as much strength. As the last crumbs are brushed away and the table returns to its many other duties, you become more aware of the smallest, most constant presence in the room. Children. They are always here, underfoot leaning against walls, perched on chairs stretched out on the floor, with quiet determination. There is no separate space for them, no room set aside for childhood. Life unfolds around them, and they learn by absorbing it whole. You notice how their movements are economical. They know where not to stand where the floor creaks, how close is too close to the fire. This knowledge comes early. It has to. In a room this small, mistakes are immediate and memorable. A bumped elbow, a sharp word, a startled cry quickly soothed. Lessons arrive without formal teaching. One widely accepted observation in accounts of working-class households is that children spent far more time indoors than we often imagine, especially in crowded urban areas. The street may call to them, but the home remains the centre of their world. Here they play in fragments. A few minutes with a bit of string, a game invented from nothing. Laughter bursts out, then is quickly reined in when it grows too loud. You see how play adapts to space. There is no running, no spreading out. Games are quiet, imaginative, contained. Children trace patterns in dust on the floor. They whisper stories to one another. They watch adults, closely absorbing gestures and tones as much as words. Childhood here is not sheltered. It is embedded. Older children drift naturally toward responsibility. They fetch water, mind younger siblings, pass tools, hold things steady. These tasks are not framed as burdens. They are simply expected. Participation equals belonging. You notice how quickly children move when asked not out of fear, but familiarity. This is how the room functions. A small but telling detail found in school attendance records shows that many children arrive tired, sometimes already having completed several household tasks before lessons began. Standing here, you understand how that happens. The day starts early. Everyone contributes. Childhood is shaped by necessity rather than schedule. Noise is managed carefully. Children learn when silence matters, during serious conversation, during illness, when tempers are close to flaring. They learn to read the room with remarkable accuracy, sensing shifts in mood long before words are spoken. This skill stays with them long after childhood fades. You notice how children position themselves near adults leaning against legs, sitting close enough to feel contact. Physical closeness replaces privacy. Comfort comes from proximity. When a child is upset, reassurance is immediate. A hand on a shoulder, a brief word. There is no space for prolonged withdrawal. Learning happens constantly, though, rarely formally. Children watch food being prepared. They observe mending. They listen to conversations meant for adults and absorb what they can. Knowledge arrives through repetition and presence rather than instruction. Over time, they know how to do things without remembering when they learned. Those who study Victorian childhood still debate whether such environments accelerated maturity or simply shortened childhood. From inside this room, the distinction feels blurred. Children are not rushed, but they are included. They grow into roles gradually shaped by what the household requires rather than what age dictates. At night, children settle wherever space allows. Some share the bed, others curl up nearby, wrapped in blankets, close enough to feel warmth and hear breathing. Sleep arrives quickly for them, exhaustion doing its quiet work. Dreams mingle with the sounds of the house, forming a backdrop that feels normal and safe. You watch how adults adjust around children without comment. Conversations pause, movements slow. Sharp edges are softened. Even in fatigue there is awareness. Children are not the center of attention, but they are never ignored. Their presence shapes everything subtly and constantly. In moments of illness or hardship, children sense it immediately. Voices lower, movements become cautious. They respond by becoming quieter, more helpful, or occasionally more restless. The room absorbs these shifts without explanation. Everyone adjusts. There is affection here, though it may not always look like it from the outside. It appears in small gestures. An extra piece of bread slipped across the table, a blanket tucked more carefully, a warning given gently rather than sharply. Care is woven into routine rarely announced. As you sit and observe, you realize that children here do not occupy a separate world. They inhabit the same space, breathe the same air, share the same rhythms as everyone else. Their childhood is not hidden behind doors or schedules. It is lived openly, shaped by closeness and constraint alike. When laughter does break free, it fills the room quickly, bright and unexpected. It is allowed for a moment, then gently contained. Even joy learns to fit within these walls. As the evening deepens and the fire settles lower, children grow quieter, their energy gradually folding inward. They lean closer to adults' eyes, heavy bodies slack with sleepiness. The house responds, softening around them. And as you watch them drift toward rest, you understand that in this home childhood is not a separate chapter. It is interwoven with every other part of life, present in every sound, every movement, every shared breath. The room holds them all, learning and growing together. One small space making room for many lives at once. As children finally settle, and the room exhales into a quieter state, another presence makes itself known, not with sound or movement, but with an unspoken familiarity. Illness lives here too, not dramatically, not always urgently, but persistently, like a neighbour who never quite leaves. You feel it in the careful way people listen to each other's breathing, in the way a cough is noted rather than ignored. Sickness in this home is not an interruption. It is part of the rhythm. A broadly recognised aspect of Victorian working-class life is that illness was common and often endured at home without doctors, without medicine, beyond what could be afforded or improvised. You sense how the household adjusts automatically when someone is unwell. Movements soften, voices lower, tasks are redistributed without discussion. A cough echoes again, deeper this time. No one startles. They exchange glances, subtle and practiced. This sound has history. It has been here before. Perhaps it will linger for weeks. Perhaps it will pass quietly. Either way, life continues around it. Work must still be done, meals still prepared, children still guided. The bed becomes more than a place for sleep when illness settles in. It turns into a sick room by default. Blankets are rearranged, pillows are added where possible. The fire is kept more carefully, its warmth considered a kind of treatment. Someone sits nearby longer than usual, pretending to mend or rest watching without seeming to. There is little privacy for illness here. Pain is shared space. Groans are heard. Restlessness is visible. This can be comforting or exhausting, often both. You feel how the presence of others provides reassurance, even as it limits solitude. No one suffers alone, but no one suffers quietly either. A curious note found in some parish records mentions that families often relied on sensory judgment to assess illness. The sound of breathing, the colour of skin, the smell of sweat, these signs mattered more than diagnoses. Standing here, you understand how attuned people become when observation replaces explanation. Remedies are simple. Warm drinks, rest when possible, a cloth soaked in water placed gently on the forehead. Sometimes herbs are added to tea passed down through habit rather than certainty. There is no illusion of cure. The goal is comfort, containment, waiting. Those who study the period still debate whether people resigned themselves to illness or actively fought it within their means. From inside this room, the answer feels layered. There is acceptance, yes, but also vigilance. People watch closely, they adjust quickly, they do what they can with what they have. Children learn about illness early. They see it, hear it, understand its seriousness without needing explanation. They are told to be quieter, to fetch water, to stay close, or give space depending on the moment. Fear exists, but it is muted, absorbed into routine, rather than allowed to dominate. At night, illness feels heavier. Sounds carry further in the dark. A restless movement wakes others. Someone rises quietly, careful not to disturb more than necessary. The room holds its breath, listening, waiting. Sleep comes lightly during these times, interrupted by concern and care. If sickness worsens, anxiety creeps in. The fire is tended more urgently. Food is coaxed into someone who does not want it. Conversation tightens, circling practical concerns. Can they work tomorrow? How long can they rest? What happens if this continues? These questions are rarely spoken aloud, but they hang in the air. There is also familiarity here. Many illnesses pass, coughs fade, fevers break. Life resumes its usual pace. This familiarity breeds resilience, but also a quiet weariness. You sense how people brace themselves, knowing that illness will return eventually, just as surely as cold weather or hunger. The room adapts again as the night deepens. The sick person sleeps fitfully. Others lie awake, listening, counting breaths without meaning to. The walls, already damp, seem to hold the heat and the worry equally. In moments like this, the closeness of the space feels different, more intense, more protective. The same lack of privacy that constrained tempers now offers reassurance. No one is beyond reach. Help is immediate, even if limited. As hours pass, exhaustion settles over everyone. Concern blurs into fatigue. Eventually, sleep takes hold. Again, not because worries are resolved, but because bodies can only stay alert for so long. The room grows still, save for the soft sounds of breathing and the fire's last embers. You lie there, aware that illness is not a separate chapter in this home story. It is woven through it, expected, endured, managed collectively. There are no dramatic cures, no sudden rescues. There is only patience, care, and the steady passage of time. And as the night stretches on, you realise that this quiet vigilance, this shared endurance, is as much a part of daily life here as meals and work. The house holds sickness the way it holds everything else, without ceremony, without judgment, simply making room and waiting for whatever comes next. As the night's worries loosen their grip and the house drifts back toward its usual rhythm, another necessity presses quietly into your awareness. Water. Not flowing, not assumed, not waiting patiently behind a tap. Water here must be fetched, measured and respected. You feel its absence as much as its presence in the way every task seems to pause and ask whether enough has been saved. The day's first water does not arrive easily. Someone shoulders a bucket and steps back out into the street, the door closing softly behind them. The air outside is colder, sharper. The walk is short, but never effortless. Pumps or shared taps serve entire rows of houses, and waiting is common. You imagine hands gripping cold metal, listening to the rhythmic splash as water rises, counting silently to judge when the bucket is full enough without being too heavy to carry. One frequently cited feature of Victorian urban living is that many working-class homes lacked a private water supply, relying instead on communal sources. Inside this room, that fact translates into constant calculation. How much water remains? What must be done before more is fetched? Which tasks can wait? The bucket returns with a dull slosh water, shifting with each careful step. Spills are avoided instinctively. Every drop matters. The bucket is set down gently, not just to avoid noise, but to prevent loss. You notice how the container itself is worn smooth, where hands have gripped it, countless times the rim nicked and scarred from use. Water is poured sparingly, a little for washing hands, a little more for cooking, some saved for tea, the remainder reserved for cleaning or emergencies. Nothing is done impulsively. Each pour is deliberate. You feel how awareness of water shapes behavior, slowing movements, sharpening attention. Washing becomes a series of compromises. Hands are wiped clean enough. Faces are refreshed without indulgence. Full bathing is rare, reserved for special occasions or warmer months when water warms more easily and dries faster. Even then, privacy is limited. Washing happens behind screens or in shifts, the same space repurposed yet again. A small but striking detail appears in some reformers' notes, describing how families sometimes reused wash water several times, starting with the cleanest task and ending with the dirtiest. You can picture it clearly. Water that clean faces first, then hands, then floors. Efficiency is not optional, it is survival. Water also carries risk. Contamination is poorly understood, but illness is noticed. Taste and smell guide decisions. If water seems off, it is boiled longer. Tea becomes not just comfort, but precaution. People trust their senses more than explanations, adjusting habits based on experience rather than instruction. Researchers still debate how aware working families were of waterborne disease, but standing here you sense a practical intelligence at work. People may not name the danger, but they recognize patterns. They adapt, they boil, they discard when necessary, even if it hurts to do so. Children are taught water discipline early. Do not splash, do not waste, do not play. These rules are firm, but not harsh. They are explained through repetition rather than lecture. A child who spills is corrected gently, but decisively. The lesson sticks. As the day progresses, the bucket grows lighter. You feel the subtle tension increase as its level drops. Decisions become more conservative. Tasks are postponed. Someone glances at the bucket more often, mentally planning the next trip. Water dictates the pace of the day without ever raising its voice. In the evening, water is saved carefully for night needs. A small amount remains for drinking. Another portion stands ready in case of illness or accident. The rest waits for morning. There is comfort in knowing it is there, even if it is not much. You imagine winter mornings when the pump handle is icy, when fingers ache, when carrying water feels heavier than usual. Those mornings shape character quietly. They teach persistence without drama. They teach the value of small efforts repeated daily. As night settles again, the bucket sits in its familiar place, a silent presence like the hearth or the table. It does not draw attention, but everything depends on it. You move around it without thinking, careful not to knock it over in the dark. You realize that water here is not invisible infrastructure. It is part of daily consciousness. Its scarcity sharpens awareness. Its presence brings relief. It connects the home to the outside world, requiring regular trips beyond the door, reminders that the house does not exist alone. And as you rest listening to the house breathe softly around you, you understand that water is not just a resource here. It is a rhythm, a repeated journey, a series of small, careful decisions that make everything else possible. Tomorrow, the bucket will empty again. Tomorrow, someone will step back out into the street. For now, though, enough remains, the fire glows, the room is still. And in this quiet pause, you feel the subtle satisfaction that comes from having planned just well enough, measured just carefully enough to make it through another night. With the bucket set safely aside and the night secured for now, your thoughts turn to something less tangible, but no less important. Privacy, or rather the version of it that exists here. You begin to realize that privacy in this home does not mean being alone. It means learning how to be unseen while fully present. There are no doors to retreat behind, no quiet rooms where thoughts can unfold without interruption. Every emotion, every conversation, every pause happens in shared space. Yet somehow people manage. They create boundaries out of timing, posture, tone. A widely acknowledged aspect of working-class domestic life is that personal space was scarce, forcing families to develop social rather than physical forms of separation. Standing here, you feel how natural those adaptations become. You watch how someone angles their body slightly away when lost in thought, signaling a desire not to be engaged. How another lowers their voice, trusting that others will choose not to listen too closely. These gestures are subtle, almost invisible to outsiders, but they are understood immediately by those who live here. Respect is negotiated moment by moment. Moments of emotional vulnerability are handled carefully. Tears are wiped quickly. Anger is expressed briefly, then contained. There is little room for prolonged displays, not because feelings are unwelcome, but because they ripple outward too easily. When one person's distress fills the room, everyone must make space for it, whether they are ready or not. You notice how people create private moments through routine. A trip to fetch water becomes a chance to think. Sitting near the fire while others sleep offers quiet reflection. Even mending repetitive and absorbing allows the mind to wander inward. Solitude is found in motion rather than isolation. A curious detail appears in some personal accounts, where individuals describe speaking to themselves quietly while working, using the rhythm of tasks to mask their words. It is a small act of privacy, barely noticeable, yet deeply human. You can imagine it easily, lips moving slightly, thoughts spoken just loudly enough to be heard by oneself. Night offers its own version of privacy. Darkness softens scrutiny. Shapes blur. Expressions are hidden. You can lie awake with eyes open, thoughts unfolding silently, while others sleep inches away. This shared darkness provides cover, allowing inner worlds to exist alongside one another without collision. Scholars still debate whether the lack of private space heightened emotional strain or fostered greater emotional intelligence. From within this room, the answer feels layered. People become skilled at reading signals, at sensing when to intervene and when to withdraw. Empathy sharpens even as tempers sometimes fray. You observe how secrets are managed. Some are shared in whispers, timed carefully to coincide with noise. Others are carried alone, tucked into the mind, protected by habit and silence. Not everything must be spoken to be real. In fact, much of life here exists beneath the surface, unarticulated but understood. Children absorb these lessons early. They learn when questions are welcome and when they are not. They learn to entertain themselves quietly, to give space without being told. Privacy becomes a social contract rather than a physical right. It is granted through behavior rather than architecture. There is also a collective understanding of dignity. Embarrassment is softened through tact. Bodies change, needs arise, and the room accommodates without comment. Modesty is preserved through discretion rather than distance. People look away when appropriate. They pretend not to notice when noticing would cause harm. You sense how this constant negotiation shapes personality. Loudness becomes strategic. Silence becomes expressive. People learn to hold themselves carefully aware that every movement and sound carries further than intended. This awareness can be exhausting, but it also fosters a deep attentiveness to others. At times, the lack of privacy presses heavily. Tempers shorten, small irritations grow sharp edges. There is nowhere to retreat and cool down completely. In those moments, someone may step outside, briefly breathing in night air, as if it were freedom itself. Even a few minutes alone can reset the balance. Yet there is comfort here too. You are never truly unseen. Help is always close. Loneliness in its modern sense struggles to take root in such proximity. Even when you feel isolated internally, the physical presence of others anchors you, reminding you that you belong to something tangible. You lie back, eyes half closed, listening to the quiet sounds of the house. Breathing, the fire's soft murmur, a distant step, your thoughts drift freely, even as your body remains surrounded. This is privacy as it exists here. Internal, portable, earned through practice. As the night deepens, you feel less crowded and more held. The room does not press in so much as it supports containing everyone's inner world side by side. Each person carries their own thoughts, quietly trusting that others will not intrude unless invited. And as you drift toward rest, you understand that privacy in this home is not about separation. It is about mutual restraint, about knowing when to look and when to look away, when to speak and when to let silence do the work. In this way, the room teaches a different kind of solitude, one that exists not in emptiness but in shared understanding. You fall asleep surrounded yet inwardly alone, a balance maintained night after night through countless small acts of consideration that go unspoken but are never unnoticed. As the night settles further and the room grows quieter, your attention drifts towards something less visible but deeply felt. Respectability. It hangs in the air here, like a quiet promise, fragile but fiercely protected. You sense it in the careful way the table is wiped, even when hands are tired, in the way clothes are brushed, before being hung, in the small rituals that signal order amid constraint. For working families in the Victorian era, respectability was not a luxury, it was a shield. Many contemporary observers noted that maintaining a tidy home and proper manners was seen as essential to moral standing, even when material comfort was out of reach. Sitting here, you understand why. When space is limited and hardship, constant dignity becomes something you actively practice. You watch how the room is straightened before sleep. Chairs are pushed back where they belong. Tools are placed neatly. Shoes are aligned carefully near the wall. These actions do not change the size of the room or the weight of tomorrow's labour, but they restore a sense of control. Order is not about aesthetics, it is about reassurance. Cleanliness is pursued within strict limits. Surfaces are wiped with damp cloths, reused countless times. Dust is swept toward corners. Ashes cleared from the hearth with quiet efficiency. The room never becomes spotless, but it becomes acceptable. That distinction matters. Acceptable means respectable. Acceptable means you have not given up. A small but telling anecdote appears in some social surveys, describing how families would hide broken items before visitors arrived, not to deceive but to preserve self-respect. You can imagine it now. A cracked mug turned toward the wall, a frayed blanket folded just so. Presentation becomes a form of self-defense. Children are taught manners early, not because politeness is decorative, but because it reflects the household. A quiet child reflects well. A respectful greeting matters. Behaviour is closely watched, not just by parents, but by neighbours, whose judgments carry weight. Reputation travels quickly in close quarters. Researchers still debate whether the emphasis on respectability empowered working families or reinforced social pressure. From within this room, the answer feels complex. The standards can be exhausting, but they also offer structure. They provide a way to measure oneself beyond wages and square footage. Clothing plays a central role in this effort. Even worn garments are kept as neat as possible. Buttons are replaced, tears are mended, dirt is brushed away before stepping outside. The act is symbolic as much as practical. It says something about who you are and how you wish to be seen. Speech follows similar rules. Language is moderated. Public behaviour is restrained. Private frustrations are expressed carefully. Loudness can be misinterpreted. Carelessness can be judged harshly. You sense how people monitor themselves constantly, aware that respectability is maintained through countless small choices. The home itself becomes a statement. Despite damp walls and limited space, it is kept orderly enough to signal effort. Visitors are rare, but when they come, the room is prepared. Tea is offered, chairs are wiped, the fire is stoked. Hospitality is extended, not from abundance, but from principle. You feel how this pursuit of respectability shapes identity. It offers pride where material success is limited. It allows people to say quietly that they are doing their best, that their lives have value beyond survival. At times, the pressure weighs heavily. Exhaustion makes tidying feel pointless. Illness interrupts routine. Tempers flare. In those moments, standards may slip briefly, only to be restored as soon as energy allows. The effort resumes not because it is easy, but because it matters. You notice how respectability also regulates relationships. Disputes are handled discreetly. Public displays of conflict are avoided. Apologies are made quickly, sometimes without words. Maintaining harmony is part of maintaining dignity. As night deepens, the room rests in its arranged state. Nothing has changed materially, yet everything feels calmer. The chairs are aligned, the table is clear, the hearth is tidy. These details whisper reassurance to anyone lying awake, reminding them that despite the day's strain, order still exists here. Scholars have long argued about whether such domestic discipline was imposed from above or cultivated from within. Sitting quietly now, you sense it as both inherited and chosen. A response to judgment, yes, but also a source of quiet pride. You lean back and let your eyes trace the room one last time. It is small, it is worn, but it is cared for. That care radiates outward, shaping how people carry themselves beyond these walls. As sleep approaches, you understand that respectability here is not about pretending life is easier than it is. It is about asserting worth in the face of limitation, about keeping a sense of self intact when so much else feels fragile. The fire glows softly, the room holds its careful order, and as you drift toward rest, you feel the comfort that comes from knowing that tomorrow, despite whatever it brings, this quiet commitment to dignity will still be here, practiced again in 1,000 small, steady ways. As the house settles into its carefully maintained order, your awareness drifts toward the quiet engine that keeps everything moving, the labour that never truly ends. Much of it belongs to women, though no one in this room would label it that way. It is simply the work that must be done, unfolding in cycles so constant they almost disappear into the background. You notice how the day bends around these tasks, rising early to coax life back into the fire, measuring out food, fetching water, cleaning, mending, watching children, tending illness. By the time night comes, the body is tired in a specific way, worn not by one great effort, but by hundreds of small ones layered together. Many contemporary accounts observed that working-class women's labour extended far beyond paid work, filling every remaining moment inside the home. Standing here, that observation feels less like analysis and more like atmosphere. There is no clear beginning or end to this labour. It flows from one task into the next, without pause. When food is finished, dishes appear. When laundry dries, mending begins. When children sleep, planning for tomorrow quietly takes its place. Rest happens only in fragments stolen between responsibilities rather than scheduled. You sense how this endlessness shapes posture and movement. Motions are efficient, practiced, stripped of excess. There is little wasted energy. Even sitting is purposeful, often combined with sewing, watching, listening. Stillness is rare and brief, and when it comes, it is often interrupted. A small but revealing detail appears in some personal letters where women described feeling uneasy when nothing needed doing, as if idleness itself were a kind of danger. You can imagine it easily. The habit of movement becomes so ingrained that stopping feels unnatural. Purpose fills every corner of the day. This work is largely invisible outside these walls. It does not earn wages. It does not attract praise. Yet without it, everything else collapses. The house would grow colder, clothes would rot with damp, children would drift, illness would spread unchecked. You feel the weight of this responsibility, even if no one names it aloud. Those who study domestic life still disagree about whether women of this class experience their labour primarily as oppression or as a source of identity. Inside this room, the answer feels complex. There is pride in competence, satisfaction in a well-managed space, but there is also fatigue that settles deep and rarely lifts. Moments of respite appear in small ways. A neighbour stopping by offering conversation, a few minutes by the fire while others sleep. These moments are not framed as breaks. They are simply pauses brief enough not to disrupt the rhythm. You notice how emotional labour weaves through physical work, managing moods, smoothing tensions, anticipating needs before they are spoken. This awareness keeps the household functioning smoothly, preventing small irritations from growing into something worse. It is quiet, constant, and rarely acknowledged. Children absorb this pattern early. Girls in particular watch closely, learning tasks through observation rather than instruction. Skills are passed down without ceremony, embedded in daily life. By adolescence, much of this work feels instinctive learned, so gradually it barely registers as learning at all. Illness complicates everything. When the primary caregiver is unwell, the household strains visibly. Tasks pile up, standards slip, anxiety rises, others step in as best they can, but the absence is felt sharply. The system relies heavily on this unseen labour, continuing without interruption. At night, when bodies finally slow, you sense the lingering alertness. Even in rest, there is listening. Awareness does not fully switch off. The mind remains attuned to changes in breathing, shifts in the room's small sounds that signal need. Sleep is light, ready to be interrupted. Scholars have long debated whether this constant vigilance shortened lives or strengthened resilience. From where you lie, half aware, half drifting, it feels like both. The body adapts, the spirit endures, but the cost is cumulative, carried quietly from day to day. You watch how this labour shapes identity. Worth is measured not in recognition, but in smooth operation. A day without crisis is a success. A meal served, clothes mended, children settled. These are victories that leave no record beyond the feeling that things are holding together. As the fire burns low, you feel gratitude woven into fatigue. The house rests because someone has kept it that way. Order has been maintained not by design but by persistence, by hands that keep moving even when energy is low. You lie there breathing slowly, aware of how much has been done before you arrived in this moment, how much will begin again tomorrow. The cycle does not invite reflection, it demands participation. And yet here in the quiet, you feel its enormity. This endless domestic rhythm does not announce itself as heroic. It simply continues, day after day, night after night, holding the household together through care, foresight, and sheer repetition. As sleep edges closer, you sense that this work, though unseen, forms the backbone of everything you have experienced in this room. Without it, nothing else would function. And as the night deepens, the house settles into the temporary stillness made possible by that labour waiting patiently to begin again at first light. As the house holds its breath in the late evening quiet, a different energy slips back inside with the opening of the door. The outside world returns on boots and shoulders, carried in without ceremony. You feel it immediately. The air shifts, the room adjusts. Work does not stay outside. It arrives home and settles into the corners. Someone steps in posture, heavy movements slower than in the morning. The smell changes subtly. Street dust, oil, metal, sweat cooled by night air. These scents layer themselves over the familiar background of coal and damp, announcing the return of labour without a word spoken. A commonly accepted observation in studies of industrial life is that the boundary between work and home was thin for the working class, with physical labour following people back through the door each evening. Boots come off near the wall, placed carefully but without fuss. They are stiff with grime, cracked at the seams. Coats are shrugged off and hung where they will dry as best they can, releasing cold into the room as they warm. You sense how the house absorbs these arrivals, how it has learned to accommodate them. Bodies carry the day's weight visibly. Shoulders slump. Hands flex slowly, fingers stiff from repetitive motion. Someone rubs at a wrist without realizing it. There is little talk at first. The room allows a moment to transition from public endurance to private fatigue. Conversation, when it begins, circles around work almost instinctively. Not in detail, not dramatically, but in fragments. A machine acting up, a foreman's temper, a long shift made longer by unexpected demands. These details are shared not to relive them, but to release them. Once spoken, they lose some of their hold. A small but revealing note appears in some factory memoirs, describing how workers would wash their hands repeatedly after returning home, not to achieve cleanliness, but to feel the day end. You notice it now. Hands are scrubbed longer than necessary water, running over skin already rough. The act is as much mental as physical. The presence of outside labour changes the room's dynamics. Children become quieter. Adults adjust their movements. The fire is tended more carefully. The household pivots subtly, making space for exhaustion. Food is offered promptly, not out of indulgence, but necessity. Hunger after labour is sharper, more immediate. You observe how the outside world enters through stories and gestures as much as through dirt. News travels this way. A rumour heard on the street, a notice posted at work, a friend injured, a strike whispered about. These pieces of information settle into the room, shaping tomorrow's worries before the night is even over. Researchers still debate whether bringing work home in this way increased stress or strengthened family bonds through shared understanding. Sitting here, you feel both at once. There is tension, yes, but also a sense of inclusion. The work is not invisible. It is acknowledged, witnessed, absorbed by the household. Men often cast as the visible earners carry their own quiet burden here. The expectation to provide weighs heavily, especially when wages are uncertain or work is irregular. You sense it in the careful way news is delivered, in the hesitation before mentioning a problem. Pride and worry coexist uneasily. The room offers what comfort it can. Warmth, food, familiar sounds. These are not cures, but they soften the edges. Someone sits closer to the fire than usual. Another leans back, eyes closed, letting the room hold them for a moment before re-engaging. As the evening deepens, the intensity fades slightly. The day's labour settles into muscles that will ache tomorrow. Conversation shifts away from work, drifting towards small domestic matters. What needs mending? Who needs shoes soon? How the weather might turn? The future is always close here, pressing in quietly. You notice how the room does not ask questions. It does not demand explanations or solutions. It simply receives. This acceptance matters. It allows exhaustion to exist without justification. It gives space for silence when words are too much effort. At times, frustration slips through, a sharp tone, a heavy sigh. These moments pass quickly, absorbed by the room's familiarity. There is little energy for prolonged conflict. Everyone understands how thin patience can become after long hours of labour. As the night wears on, the outside world loosens its grip. Boots dry, coats warm, hands relax slightly. The room reasserts its own rhythm, slower and steadier than the pace of work. Sleep begins to feel possible again. You sit with this transition, sensing how the home acts as a buffer, catching the impact of the day and distributing it gently among those inside. It does not erase hardship, it contains it. That containment is its quiet strength. When the fire burns low and voices fade, the outside world finally recedes. It will return tomorrow, relentless and demanding. But for now it has been absorbed, diluted by warmth and routine. And as you lie back listening to the soft sounds of the house, settling once more, you understand that this room does more than shelter bodies. It receives the weight of labour itself, holding it overnight, so that everyone inside can rise again and carry it back out at dawn. As the outside world finally loosens its grip and the house settles into a slower rhythm, another presence presses quietly into every thought. Money, or more precisely the absence of it. You feel it not as panic, but as a low, constant awareness, like a faint ache that never quite goes away. Every decision in this room bends subtly around numbers that are rarely spoken aloud. Rent is the first concern, always waiting in the background. It arrives weekly or monthly, indifferent to illness, weather, or exhaustion. Many period housing records make clear that rent consumed a significant portion of working class wages, often leaving little margin for error. Sitting here, you understand how that knowledge shapes behaviour. Nothing is casual, nothing is wasted without thought. Conversation turns practical without needing to be prompted. Someone mentions the price of coal, another notes the cost of bread this week compared to the last. These observations are not complaints exactly, they are calculations shared so that everyone stays aligned. Awareness is collective, no one carries the numbers alone. Wages are discussed carefully. There is pride in bringing money home, but also vulnerability in admitting how little it sometimes is. You sense the hesitation before someone mentions a shorter shift, a missed day, a delay in payment. The room listens closely, not judging, simply absorbing the information and adjusting expectations accordingly. A small but revealing detail appears in some household notebooks where families tracked expenses down to the penny, recording even minor purchases with care. You can imagine it clearly, a scrap of paper tucked into the chest, numbers written small and neat, not out of obsession, but necessity. Memory alone is not enough when margins are this thin. Anxiety shows itself in subtle ways. Someone counts coins twice, another hesitates before using an extra candle. Food portions are adjusted slightly without comment. These micro decisions ripple outward, shaping comfort, warmth, and mood. No one panics openly. Panic would waste energy, better spent enduring. Scholars still debate whether constant financial pressure led primarily to chronic stress or sharpened financial discipline among working families. From inside this room, the answer feels like both. There is worry, yes, but also remarkable skill. People here are experts in stretching resources, in anticipating shortfalls, in surviving unpredictability. Children absorb this awareness early. They learn not to ask for things lightly. They sense when money is tight without being told. Requests are phrased carefully or withheld entirely. Understanding arrives through atmosphere rather than explanation. Illness sharpens financial fear immediately. Missed work means missed wages. The room grows quieter when this possibility arises, thoughts turning inward as calculations adjust again. How long can someone rest? What can be postponed? What cannot? These questions circulate silently, rarely voiced directly. Even moments of joy are filtered through this awareness. A treat is savoured precisely because it is rare. New clothes bring relief alongside gratitude. Nothing arrives without consequence, and nothing is taken for granted. You notice how neighbours factor into this equation. Borrowing is possible, but never casual. Favours attract mentally. Debts are repaid carefully, even if slowly. Reputation matters. Reliability is a form of currency when money is scarce. As night deepens, these concerns do not vanish. They soften slightly, pushed aside by fatigue and routine. Sleep offers temporary relief, but the numbers wait patiently, ready to return in the morning. You sense how this constant calculation shapes dreams, worries, and plans. The room itself seems to hold this anxiety, gently distributing it so no one person bears it entirely. Shared knowledge lessens the load, even if it does not reduce the problem. There is comfort in knowing that everyone understands the stakes. You lie back and let your breathing slow, aware that tomorrow's choices will be shaped by the same constraints. Rent will still be due, wages will still be uncertain, yet life will continue negotiated, one careful decision at a time. As the fire dims and the house grows still, you feel the quiet determination that lives alongside worry here. Fear exists, but it does not dominate. It informs, it guides, it keeps people alert without breaking them. And as sleep finally takes hold, you realize that this low hum of financial awareness is not just pressure. It is also proof of resilience, of minds constantly working to keep the household afloat, of lives balanced delicately but persistently, on careful thought and shared resolve night after night without applause or relief, as worries about money ease slightly into the background. Another aspect of evening life quietly takes shape: entertainment. Not in the sense of escape or distraction, as you might imagine it now, but in smaller, softer forms that fit within these walls. There is no room here for spectacle. What passes the time does so gently woven into the rhythms already established. You notice how conversation itself becomes a kind of entertainment. Stories are told in fragments, shaped by memory rather than performance. Someone recalls an incident from work. Another mentions a neighbour's mishap. These tales are not dramatic. They are familiar, often repeated, but repetition does not dull their value. Familiar stories comfort because they are known. Music appears occasionally unannounced. A tune hummed softly while mending. A half-remembered song passed between voices. It does not require instruments. The room itself carries sound well enough. A recognised observation from accounts of working households notes that singing was often informal, woven into daily tasks, rather than reserved for special occasions. Sitting here, you feel how melody lifts the air without demanding attention. Children create their own diversions, games made from nothing, rhymes whispered back and forth. The edge of a chair becomes a toy. Shadows on the wall invite imagination. Play does not need space, it needs permission, and that permission is given sparingly but warmly. Sometimes reading enters the room. A newspaper shared carefully, pages passed from hand to hand. News read aloud for those who cannot read easily or at all. Words carry weight here. They connect the household to a wider world, one that feels distant yet pressing. Reading aloud becomes a communal act, entertainment and information blending seamlessly. A small but charming detail appears in some memoirs, describing how families would linger over serialized stories in newspapers, stretching each installment by rereading it slowly. You can imagine it now. Someone pausing mid-sentence, savouring the suspense, making the moment last a little longer than the paper intended. Laughter arrives unexpectedly. A joke lands, a comment catches everyone off guard. It bursts out bright and brief, then settles again. Laughter here is not sustained. It flares, then fades, leaving behind a lighter atmosphere that lingers quietly. Those who study domestic leisure still debate whether working families felt deprived of entertainment or simply adapted their expectations. From inside this room, the question feels less relevant. Pleasure exists here, just scaled differently. It fits between tasks rather than replacing them. Games sometimes appear simple and portable. A deck of cards, a few dice, stakes are low, often symbolic. Winning might mean choosing the next song or earning a teasing remark. The goal is not profit, it is connection. Even silence becomes entertainment of a sort. Sitting together without speaking, listening to the fire, watching shadows shift. In these moments, presence itself is enough. The room does not demand constant stimulation. It allows stillness. You sense how evenings here are shaped less by choice than by energy. After long days, elaborate amusements would feel like work. Simple pleasures suit exhaustion better. They soothe rather than excite. As the night deepens, these small diversions taper off naturally. Voices grow softer, movements slow. Entertainment yields to rest without resistance. No one resents its passing. Tomorrow will bring its own distractions, woven into labour and routine. You lean back slightly, feeling the warmth of the fire and the nearness of others. The room hums quietly with shared presence. Nothing remarkable is happening, and that is precisely the point. These moments do not need to be remembered vividly. They are meant to pass gently, carrying you towards sleep. As eyes grow heavy and thoughts drift, you realise that entertainment here is not about forgetting hardship. It is about making space within it, finding lightness without denying weight, sharing time in ways that ask little and offer just enough. The fire settles lower, voices fade, the room grows still again, and as you allow yourself to relax fully, you understand that these quiet evenings, filled with modest pleasures and shared calm, are not empty. They are essential stitching, small moments of relief into lives otherwise defined by effort, one unassuming night at a time. As the room settles into deeper quiet and entertainment gives way to rest, your thoughts drift toward belief. Not belief as doctrine or formal worship alone, but belief as something woven into daily survival. Faith, superstition, hope and habit blur together here, forming a quiet framework that helps explain what cannot be controlled. You notice small signs of it everywhere: a murmured phrase before sleep, a habit of touching a certain object near the hearth, a moment of stillness when bad news is mentioned. These gestures are not always conscious. They are inherited, practiced, because they have always been practiced. One widely accepted observation of Victorian working-class life is that religion and superstition often existed side by side, neither fully replacing the other. Formal faith appears in fragments. Church attendance when possible. Hymns remembered more than sermons. Moral language woven into everyday speech. Yet belief does not require a building here. It lives in the room itself, in the way people explain misfortune, or luck, illness, or recovery. When things go well, gratitude is expressed quietly. When they go badly, meaning is sought just as quietly. Superstition fills the gaps where explanation fails. A horseshoe nailed above a door, a belief that certain actions invite bad fortune, a rule about not doing certain tasks on certain days. These practices are not framed as irrational. They are practical in their own way, offering structure when outcomes feel random. A curious detail recorded in some folkloric collections mentions that many families believed illness could be drawn out through the feet, leading them to keep socks on, even in sleep. Whether or not it helped, the belief offered reassurance. It allowed people to feel they were doing something, even when control was limited. You sense how belief also regulates behavior. It encourages patience, endurance, acceptance. When hardship is framed as a test or a temporary trial, it becomes easier to bear. Hope does not always look optimistic here. Sometimes it looks like persistence, like getting up again tomorrow, despite everything. Scholars continue to debate whether working-class belief systems offer genuine comfort or simply masked structural hardship. Sitting quietly in this room, the distinction feels less important than the effect. Belief provides language for uncertainty. It gives shape to fear and relief alike. Children absorb these ideas early. They learn which days are lucky, which actions are avoided, which phrases are whispered when trouble threatens. These lessons arrive not through instruction, but through repetition. Belief becomes part of the room's rhythm, as familiar as the fire or the bed. At night, belief feels closer. Darkness invites reflection. The mind wanders more freely when tasks are done and bodies are still. Someone murmurs a prayer under their breath. Another simply closes their eyes and listens, trusting that rest itself is enough for now. You notice how belief also softens grief. Loss, when it comes, is framed as part of a larger story, even if that story is only half understood. This does not erase pain, but it gives it somewhere to go, a place to rest when answers are unavailable. The room holds these beliefs gently. There is no argument here, no insistence on correctness. Faith and superstition coexist peacefully, each offering comfort in different moments. What matters is not precision, but continuity. As the night deepens further, thoughts slow. Belief becomes less active, more like a background hum. It does not demand attention, it simply exists, offering reassurance without interruption. You lie back and let your breathing settle, aware of how much of daily life here depends on hope of some kind. Hope that work will continue, that illness will pass, that tomorrow will be manageable. These hopes are not shouted, they are whispered into routine. And as sleep draws closer, you realize that belief in this home is not about certainty. It is about endurance, about finding ways to keep going when control is limited and explanations are scarce. It lives quietly in habits and gestures, more than words, supporting lives that demand resilience every single day. The fire dims, the room grows still, and within that stillness, belief rests alongside you, not as a promise of change, but as a companion through whatever comes next. As belief settles into the background hum of the night, the room reminds you of something far more immediate and physical. The seasons. They are never distant concepts here. They press directly against the walls, seep through cracks, and announce themselves on skin and breath. You feel them even now, shaping how the house holds you. Cold is the most familiar visitor. It arrives early and leaves late, lingering well beyond what the calendar suggests. The walls do not keep it out so much as slow it down. When winter deepens, the room tightens inward. Bodies cluster closer, the fire becomes more precious. Every movement is planned with warmth in mind. A commonly recognized reality of Victorian urban life is that many working homes struggle to maintain adequate heat during colder months, relying heavily on limited fuel and shared body warmth. You notice how clothing layers multiply as temperatures drop. Extra shawls, stockings pulled higher, coats worn indoors long after stepping inside. Even sleep adapts. Bodies pressed together more deliberately. Blankets are arranged with careful strategy. No one complains openly. Cold is expected. It is endured rather than challenged. Morning cold is the hardest. The fire has dimmed overnight. The air feels sharp when you move. Hands ache as they reach for metal or water. Breath fogs faintly indoors. Rising from bed requires resolve. You sense how people hesitate for just a moment longer, gathering courage before exposing themselves to the chill. A small but telling note appears in some winter diaries, describing how families would delay rising until absolutely necessary, stretching warmth as long as possible. You can imagine it easily, eyes open, bodies still, listening to the house wake slowly before committing to movement. Summer brings its own challenges. Heat settles into the room and refuses to leave. The same walls that trap warmth in winter now hold it stubbornly. Air grows thick, sleep becomes restless. Bodies shift and separate, seeking any scrap of coolness. Windows are opened cautiously, balancing ventilation with privacy and safety. Sweat becomes unavoidable. Clothes cling, the smell of the room intensifies. Tasks feel heavier, more draining. You notice how work slows slightly, not from laziness but necessity. Energy is finite. The body demands pacing. Those who examine domestic records still debate whether summer or winter was more taxing for working families. From inside this space, the answer depends on the day. Winter drains slowly, relentlessly. Summer exhausts quickly, intensely. Both leave their mark. Rain complicates everything. Dampness deepens. Walls feel cooler. Clothes dry even more slowly. The room seems to absorb moisture, eagerly holding onto it long after skies clear. You sense how rain changes mood, turning the house inward quiet, heavy with waiting. Children respond to seasons instinctively. In winter, they hover closer to the fire. In summer, they seek the floor, stretching out where it feels marginally cooler. Their bodies adapt faster, but their patience wears thin more easily. The room feels this too, adjusting its rhythm around them. You notice how the seasons dictate routine without needing to be discussed. Certain tasks wait for warmer weather, others are rushed before cold sets in. The house operates on an unspoken seasonal calendar, guided by experience rather than dates. Scholars have argued whether industrialization softened seasonal hardship through steady employment or worsened it by trapping families in poorly built housing. Sitting here, you feel the answer in your bones. Work may continue year-round, but the house still answers to weather first. At night, seasonal extremes are felt most keenly. In winter, the cold creeps in as the fire dims. Blankets are pulled tighter. Sleep comes heavy and deep, driven by exhaustion and warmth. In summer, heat lingers, making sleep shallow, interrupted by small movements and whispered complaints. The room itself seems to age with the seasons. Winter leaves it tighter, quieter. Summer makes it restless, overstimulated. Spring brings brief relief, a sense of expansion. Autumn carries anticipation, a knowing preparation for what comes next. You realize how little control exists here over these changes. There are no adjustments beyond habit and improvisation. The house does what it can, the people do the rest. As you lie there, aware of the season pressing gently against the walls, you feel the quiet resilience built through repetition. People here have learned not to fight the weather. They work with it, around it, through it. Resistance would waste energy, better spent enduring. The fire glows or fades, windows open or close, bodies cluster or spread. The room responds night after night, year after year. And as you drift closer to sleep, you understand that seasons here are not background scenery. They are active participants in daily life, shaping comfort, mood, and survival itself. The house does not shield you from them completely. It introduces you, forces familiarity, teaches respect. Outside, the weather does what it will. Inside, you adapt. That adaptation, quiet and constant, becomes second nature. You stop wishing for perfect conditions. You focus instead on making each season bearable, one careful adjustment at a time. The room settles again, holding just enough warmth or releasing just enough heat to let sleep find you. Tomorrow, the season will still be there waiting. But for now, in this narrow window of night, you rest within the balance you have learned to keep. As the season presses quietly against the walls and the house settles into its familiar nighttime balance, you become aware of movement that has nothing to do with people. It is subtle at first, a faint rustle near the floor, a tiny scratch behind the wall. Life exists here that no one invited, yet no one is surprised by. You share this shelter with more than just one another. Infestations are not dramatic invasions. They are a constant condition. One widely acknowledged aspect of 19th century urban housing is that overcrowding and poor sanitation made insects and rodents nearly impossible to eliminate entirely. Inside this room, that reality feels ordinary rather than alarming. You notice how people pause before stepping, how crumbs are swept carefully, how containers are closed with intention. Mice are the most common companions. You hear them at night, quick and light, moving along paths they know well. They are bold but cautious, disappearing at the slightest disturbance. Traps may be set, but success is temporary. For every mouse caught, another eventually appears. The goal is not eradication, it is management. Insects arrive with the seasons. Fleas hitch rides on clothing. Lice pass easily between heads in close quarters. Bedbugs find warmth and stillness irresistible. These creatures do not announce themselves until they are already established. Scratching becomes common. Complaints are brief and resigned. Everyone knows the cause. A curious detail, mentioned in some household advice pamphlets, describes the use of herbs tucked into bedding to deter insects. Lavender or pennyroyal place more for hope than certainty. Whether effective or not, the practice offered comfort. It suggested that something was being done even when results were uncertain. You sense how the presence of pests shapes behavior. Bedding is shaken regularly. Mattresses are turned. Floors are swept with extra care. Clothes are inspected by touch rather than sight, fingers searching for signs before problems grow worse. These routines are absorbed into daily life, not treated as emergencies. Children learn about these unseen companions early. They are taught not to leave food exposed, to report bites, to accept itching without panic. Fear would serve no purpose here. Calm response is more useful. Those who study working-class health still debate how much these infestations contributed to illness, compared to other factors like nutrition and air quality. Lying here, feeling an occasional itch you cannot quite ignore, the question feels less abstract. Discomfort is real. Relief is limited. Endurance becomes the primary strategy. At night, awareness heightens. Darkness sharpens sensation. A brush against skin might be fabric or something else entirely. You adjust blankets instinctively, tucking edges carefully, minimizing exposed areas. Sleep arrives anyway, carried by exhaustion more than comfort. The house itself bears marks of this shared existence. Small holes near baseboards, repairs made and remade, gaps stuffed with whatever material is available. Complete sealing is impossible. The building breathes, and so do its inhabitants, human and otherwise. There is little shame attached to this. Everyone deals with the same issues. Comparison offers no relief. Instead, there is quiet solidarity and shared irritation. A neighbour mentions bites. Another nods knowingly. Advice is exchanged without judgment. You notice how people avoid discussing infestations with outsiders when possible. Respectability, once again, demands discretion. What is common knowledge inside the community is not offered freely beyond it. Silence becomes another form of management. In moments of exhaustion, these small intrusions feel heavier. A bite itches more sharply, a rustle startles more easily. Tempers shorten, then morning comes and irritation fades into routine once again. There is work to do, no time to dwell. As you lie still listening to the faint sounds of the house settling, you accept this reality without surprise. The room has always been shared, with noise, with damp, with cold, with warmth, with creatures drawn to the same shelter. The presence of these unseen lives does not dominate the night. It simply exists, another layer in the complex environment you inhabit. You learn to coexist, to mitigate where possible, to ignore where necessary. And as sleep deepens, awareness softens. Sensation fades into background hum. The room holds everyone within it, from the largest to the smallest, all seeking warmth, safety, and rest. Tomorrow the routines will continue. Sweeping, shaking, checking, adapting. These acts are not dramatic. They are maintenance, part of the quiet labour that keeps life tolerable within these walls. As your breathing slows and thoughts drift, you understand that survival here is not just about enduring great hardships. It is about tolerating countless small ones, about sharing space with more than you would choose, and still finding rest. The house breathes softly. The night stretches on. And within this crowded shelter, sleep eventually finds you imperfect but sufficient, carrying you gently toward morning once again. As the night grows quieter, and even the smallest rustlings fade into the background, something gentler makes itself known. Joy, not the loud kind, not the sort that demands attention, but small comforts that slip in, almost unnoticed. You feel them arrive in moments so ordinary, they might be missed entirely if you were not paying attention. A chair pulled closer to the fire, just right, a blanket adjusted so it covers your feet properly. The warmth that lingers a little longer than expected. These are not luxuries, but they feel like gifts all the same. One often noted observation in accounts of working-class life is that people learn to savour brief comforts intensely, precisely because they were brief. Sitting here now, you understand that instinct completely. Someone produces something slightly out of the ordinary. A piece of sugar saved for weeks. A bit of fruit brought home unexpectedly. The room reacts immediately, though quietly. Eyes lift, hands pause. Portions are divided carefully, fairness considered instinctively. The pleasure is not just in the taste, but in the break from sameness. You notice how these moments change the atmosphere. Conversation lightens, shoulders relax, even the fire seems to burn a little brighter, as if acknowledging the shift. The house feels less like a place of endurance, and more like a place of living, if only for a short while. A small but touching detail appears in some personal recollections, describing how families marked minor occasions, with simple rituals, a better meal on payday, a cleaner table on Sunday evening, a story told, just because there was time. These moments did not erase hardship, but they punctuated it, offering pauses that made continuation possible. Children respond most visibly. Their energy lifts. They smile more easily. A laugh escapes before being caught. Adults notice and allow it, just this once, understanding how rare these moments are. Joy here is not indulged endlessly. It is acknowledged, then gently contained, so it does not disappear entirely. You feel how even rest itself becomes a small pleasure. Sitting without immediate obligation, letting hands remain still, staring into the fire without needing to tend it. These pauses are earned, and that knowledge deepens their sweetness. Those who study emotional life in crowded households still debate whether constant strain dulled people's capacity for joy or sharpened it. From inside this room, the answer feels clear. Joy is not dulled, it is concentrated. It gathers power because it is rare. Even humour appears quietly. A shared look, a dry comment, a familiar joke repeated again and again. Laughter does not roll, it flickers then settles. but its effect lingers, softening the edges of the night. You notice how memory works here. Small joys are remembered vividly. A good evening stands out against many similar ones. These memories are carried forward, recalled during harder moments, as proof that lighter ones do exist. The room itself seems to respond. The walls feel less close, the ceiling less heavy. Nothing has physically changed, yet the space feels larger, expanded by mood rather than architecture. As the night deepens, these comforts begin to fade naturally. No one resists their passing. They have done their work. They have offered relief, however briefly. That is enough. You lean back and let the warmth settle into you, aware of how these small joys sustain far more than they entertain. They remind everyone here that life is not only about making it through, it is also about noticing when things are slightly better than expected. Even tomorrow's challenges feel more manageable after moments like this. The memory of warmth, the taste of something sweet, the sound of quiet laughter. These things travel forward in time, cushioning the next day before it arrives. As sleep approaches again, you feel gratitude surface softly, not directed at anything specific, but at the existence of these moments at all. They are not guaranteed. They must be recognized when they appear. The fire glows low. The room is calm. And within this calm, you understand that survival here is not fueled by hardship alone. It is carried forward by these small, almost invisible joys gathered carefully and held close night after night until morning comes again. As those small comforts fade gently into the background, your awareness stretches outward beyond these walls. The home does not exist alone. It is part of a dense web of other homes, other lives all pressed close together. Community here is not optional. It forms whether you seek it or not, shaped by proximity, necessity, and repetition. You feel it in the way people recognize footsteps on the stairs, in how voices are identified through walls without seeing faces. Neighbors are known by sound, by habit, by routine. Someone rises early every day. Someone else coughs late into the night. These patterns become as familiar as those of your own household. A widely recognized feature of Victorian working-class neighborhoods is that daily life unfolded in close contact, with families living side by side in ways that made isolation nearly impossible. Support emerges naturally from this closeness. When illness strikes, someone notices. When a child cries unusually long, concern ripples outward. Help is offered quietly. A bowl of food appears. An errand is run. These acts are not framed as charity. They are investments in mutual survival. Today it is them. Tomorrow it may be you. Conversation travels easily between homes. News moves quickly past along stairwells and shared courtyards. Employment opportunities. Warnings about landlords. Rumours of rising prices. This information is practical and immediate. Knowing early can make a difference. Community functions as an informal network, filling gaps left by distant institutions. A small but revealing detail appears in some neighbourhood accounts, describing how doors were often left ajar during daylight hours, not out of carelessness, but trust. You can imagine it now. A door opened just enough to signal presence availability. Boundaries exist, but they are porous, flexible. Disputes happen too. Close quarters sharpen friction, noise complaints, borrowed items not returned quickly enough, children squabbling across households. These tensions flare, then settle. Long-term feuds are rare because proximity demands resolution. You cannot avoid someone you will see again tomorrow. Those who analyze urban communities still debate whether such enforced closeness bred solidarity or resentment. Sitting here, you sense both currents flowing together. There is irritation, certainly. Privacy is limited, yet there is also reassurance. You are known, your absence would be noticed. Children roam between households with ease. They learn which doors welcome them, which voices to answer promptly. This shared upbringing spreads responsibility. A child misbehaves and is corrected by whichever adult is nearest. Discipline is communal expectations, consistent. During hard times, community becomes a safety net. A job lost, a sickness prolonged. The neighbourhood absorbs the shock as best it can. Resources are pooled informally. Skills are exchanged. One family watches children, while another works longer hours. These arrangements are fluid, renegotiated constantly. At night, the sense of community shifts again. Sounds soften, lights dim. The building itself seems to draw inward, holding everyone together. You sense the collective settling, the shared transition into rest. Sleep arrives not just individually, but communally, layered across rooms and floors. There is comfort in this shared rhythm. You know you are not the only one lying awake, briefly listening, not the only one worrying quietly, not the only one planning for tomorrow. These parallel experiences create a sense of belonging that does not require conversation. Community also shapes identity. Reputation matters. Reliability matters. Being known as someone who helps, who pays debts, who keeps their word carries weight. These qualities travel faster than gossip and last longer. They become a form of social security. You notice how humour circulates too. A story retold across households gains new details. A joke becomes shared property. Laughter echoes faintly through walls connecting spaces that never fully separate. Even amusement becomes communal. As you lie back, you feel how the boundaries of this home extend outward, blending into others. The walls do not fully contain life, they filter it. What happens here matters beyond these bricks, just as what happens elsewhere seeps in. This interdependence can feel heavy at times. There is little room to fail privately, yet there is also little chance of disappearing completely. Presence is constant, visibility is unavoidable, support is close at hand. You sense how this network steadies people. It does not eliminate hardship, but it distributes it. When one household strains, others lean in. The balance shifts subtly, constantly, keeping collapse at bay. As the night deepens and the building grows quieter, community remains, even in stillness. It hums softly, an awareness rather than a sound. You rest within it, knowing that beyond your small room, others are doing the same. And as sleep finally takes hold, you understand that survival here is rarely solitary. It is collective, shaped by shared walls, shared routines, and shared endurance. Tomorrow, doors will open again. Voices will return. The web will tighten and loosen as needed. For now, the neighbourhood sleeps together, bound by proximity and necessity, carrying one another quietly through the dark toward another morning. As the neighbourhood quiets and the building settles into its shared sleep, your thoughts turn toward time itself. Aging here is not marked by milestones or celebrations so much as by gradual shifts in pace. You notice it in the way movements slow, in how certain tasks are passed along without announcement, in the subtle reordering of who does what and when. Older bodies move differently through the room. They know exactly where to step, where to sit, how to conserve effort. Chairs become more important. The spot closest to the fire is claimed more often, not out of entitlement, but need. Warmth soothes joints that no longer recover quickly from cold. One well-documented feature of working-class life is that many people aged visibly earlier than wealthier counterparts, the result of long hours of labour and limited rest. Sitting here, you can see that reality written into posture and breath. Work does not end cleanly with age. It tapers. Tasks shift from heavy lifting to lighter, steadier contributions. Mending, watching children, passing on knowledge earned through repetition rather than instruction. Experience becomes currency, valued quietly, but consistently. The household adjusts around this without discussion. It simply knows. A small but touching detail appears in some memoirs, describing how elders often told the same stories repeatedly. Not because they forgot, but because those stories anchored them. The room listens politely, even when the ending is known. Familiarity brings comfort. Repetition is not a flaw here. It is a rhythm. You notice how aging is visible to children. They watch how older hands tremble slightly, how breath shortens after small exertions. These observations shape understanding long before words are exchanged. Respect grows naturally, rooted in proximity and dependence rather than abstract rules. Those who study family structures still debate whether extended households provided sufficient support for aging members, or placed additional strain on already limited resources. From inside this space, the answer feels layered. Support exists, but it is not effortless. Care is given because it must be, because the alternative is unthinkable. Illness and age intertwine here. A cough lingers longer. Recovery slows. The room responds with patience, learned through necessity. Schedules adjust. Expectations soften. The presence of age adds another layer of vigilance to nights already attuned to sound and movement. Privacy shifts again with age. Bodily needs become more visible. Assistance is offered quietly with tact. Dignity is preserved through discretion rather than distance. Eyes look away when appropriate. Conversations pause. The room collaborates in maintaining respect. You sense how memory shapes identity here. Elders remember earlier versions of the neighborhood, earlier hardships, earlier joys. These memories are shared selectively, woven into conversation when relevant. They provide perspective, reminding others that change, however slow, does happen. At night, older bodies settle carefully. Sleep comes earlier, often lighter, punctuated by wakefulness. You imagine lying awake, listening to the house, just as you do now, thoughts drifting through years rather than minutes. Time stretches differently with age. Researchers still disagree about whether aging in crowded conditions accelerated decline or fostered resilience through constant engagement. Sitting quietly, you sense both. The body wears down, yes, but the mind stays active, connected, involved. Isolation has little room to take root. You notice how the room feels different with elders present. Calmer, more deliberate, movements slow slightly, matching their pace. The house adapts its rhythm, accommodating those who cannot rush anymore. There is comfort in this continuity. Generations overlap, sharing space and routine. Knowledge passes not through instruction but observation. Skills are absorbed gradually, almost unconsciously. As you lie back listening to the soft breathing around you, you feel time layered thickly in this room. Past and present coexist. The walls have seen many bodies, age, many hands slow, many voices soften. The house remembers even when people forget. Tomorrow the cycle will continue. Work for the young, care for the old, learning for the children, all within the same narrow space. Nothing separates these stages cleanly. They overlap, blend, support one another. And as sleep deepens, you understand that aging here is not hidden away. It is lived openly, woven into daily life. The room makes space where it can, adjusting gently, accepting change without ceremony. Time passes quietly, bodies change, the house remains holding each stage without judgment, and in this shared stillness, you rest within that continuum. One moment among many carried gently forward by the slow, steady rhythm of lives aging together. As the night stretches deeper and the house settles into its slowest rhythm, another certainty moves quietly through the room. Death. Not as spectacle or sudden interruption, but as something domestic, familiar, and close. Here it does not arrive behind closed doors or distant institutions. It enters the same space where meals were eaten, clothes were mended, and sleep was shared. When death comes, it does not remove itself from daily life. It takes place within it. A commonly acknowledged reality of working-class Victorian homes is that people often died at home, surrounded by family, not because of preference, but because there were few alternatives. Standing here, you feel how this shapes the household's understanding of endings. Death is not hidden, it is managed. The bed becomes something else once again. Curtains are drawn if they exist. Candles are lit carefully, not lavishly. The body is washed by familiar hands, treated with tenderness, born of routine rather than ceremony. Movements are quiet, voices lower instinctively. The room seems to contract, focusing inward. Children are not always sent away. Sometimes they remain watching from corners, absorbing the reality without explanation. Death is not framed as something too frightening to witness. It is presented as something that happens, something to be respected. Fear exists, but it is tempered by familiarity. A small but striking detail appears in some parish accounts, describing how households would borrow chairs from neighbours to accommodate visitors during a death. You can picture it easily. Extra chairs lining the walls, neighbours arriving quietly, sitting together in shared stillness. Community gathers, not with noise but presence. The smell of the room changes subtly. Candles, clean linen, the faint stillness that accompanies a body no longer breathing. These sensory shifts mark the moment more clearly than words. Everyone feels it, even if no one speaks. Those who study domestic death still debate whether such proximity softened grief or intensified it. Sitting here, you sense both. Loss is immediate, unavoidable. There is no distance to buffer it, yet there is also comfort in familiarity. The person has not vanished into an unknown place. They remain here in the space that knew them best. Practical concerns arise quickly. Arrangements must be made, work shifts adjusted, money counted. Grief does not suspend responsibility, it intertwines with it. The household moves carefully, balancing sorrow with necessity. At night, the presence of death feels heavier. Silence thickens, sounds carry further. Someone sits awake longer than usual, watching the fire, listening. Sleep comes unevenly interrupted by memory and thought. The room holds grief the way it holds everything else, without ceremony, without relief. Children ask questions quietly or not at all. They sense the change. They feel it in the adults' movements, in the altered rhythm of the room. Answers, when given, are simple. Death is explained as part of life's pattern, not as an aberration. Scholars have long questioned whether constant exposure to death hardened people emotionally or fostered acceptance. From inside this room, the answer feels layered. Grief is deep, but it is not prolonged by mystery. Loss is understood as real, final, and shared. After death, the room slowly reclaims itself. Chairs are returned, bedding is rearranged, the fire resumes its usual rhythm. Life does not snap back instantly. It drifts back cautiously, respecting absence while accommodating continuation. Memories linger in objects. A chair remains empty a little longer than necessary. A mug is not used. These pauses are brief but meaningful. They allow grief to exist without overt display. Eventually, routine reasserts itself. Not because grief has ended, but because life requires motion. The house absorbs loss and continues. It has done so before. It will do so again. As you lie there, breathing slowly, you feel how death here is not a distant concept. It is woven into domestic life, acknowledged without drama, mourned without spectacle. The room knows how to hold it. The fire glows low. The night deepens. Somewhere in memory, voices echo softly. And within these walls, life continues, alongside loss, neither denying nor overwhelming the other, simply existing together, as they always have in this small, resilient space. The house grows very still now, not suddenly, but through a series of small withdrawals. Voices fade, movement slows. Even the fire seems to breathe more quietly, its glow steady but subdued, as if it too is preparing to rest. Night settles fully over the room, and with it comes a sense of completion. Another day has passed inside these walls. You lie where space allows body, arranged carefully among others, aware of every familiar shape in the darkness. The table stands where it always does. The chairs rest close to the wall. The bucket waits half full, ready for morning. Nothing has changed, and yet everything has shifted slightly, carried forward by the simple fact of time passing. This home has held work and rest, hunger, and warmth, illness and care. It has absorbed footsteps, laughter, coughing, whispers and grief. It has made room for children growing adults, straining elders slowing. It has contained entire lives without ever expanding, teaching those inside how to adapt instead. A widely recognised reality of Victorian working class life is that homes like this were never meant to be permanent refuges. They were meant to be functional, economical, efficient. Yet over time, they became something more. They became witnesses. Memory settles into them, quietly layered into walls and floors, carried forward by habit. You feel that weight now, not as pressure, but as presence. The house is full of what has been lived here before. Every night adds another layer, another faint imprint. Sleep does not erase these things, it rests among them. Those who reflect on domestic history still argue whether such homes were places of hardship first or belonging first. Lying here in the dark, the distinction feels unnecessary. They were both simultaneously. Constraint and care coexisted, shaping one another without pause. Your breathing slows. The sounds around you soften into a familiar pattern. Somewhere nearby, someone turns slightly in their sleep. The building responds with a quiet creak, then settles again. These sounds no longer demand attention. They reassure. You realize that tomorrow will look much like today. The fire will be lit again. Water will be fetched again. Bread will be broken again. Worries will return. So will small comforts. Life here is not about transformation. It is about continuation. As your thoughts drift, you sense gratitude rising gently, not directed at ease or abundance, but at persistence. At the fact that this room, worn and imperfect, has carried so many nights like this and will carry more. The darkness feels thicker now, wrapping around you without resistance. Your body grows heavy, supported by shared warmth and familiar rhythms. The house hums softly, a living thing at rest. And as sleep finally takes you, you do not feel like a visitor anymore. You feel held temporarily, folded into the long, quiet story of this place. The walls remain. The fire breathes lower. The night stretches on. Now let everything slow even further. The thoughts that have followed you through narrow rooms and long days begin to loosen their grip. You no longer need to hold on to details. You do not need to remember names or tasks or worries. They can rest now, just as you can. Imagine the house settling deeper into the earth, steady and calm. The damp walls no longer feel cold. They simply feel solid, protective. The sounds beyond them fade into a distant hush, softened by distance and time. Your breathing evens out, matching the rhythm of those around you. In and out, slow, unhurried. Each breath carries warmth. Each exhale releases what you no longer need to hold. The fire's glow dims further, turning into a gentle memory of light rather than a source. Shadows dissolve completely. The room becomes shape and sensation rather than sight. There is nothing left to do tonight. No water to fetch, no work to plan, no decisions to weigh. The house will remember all of that for you until morning. For now, you're simply here, safe enough, warm enough, surrounded. Let the weight of the day sink fully away. Let the small sounds blur into silence. Let sleep arrive without effort. The house holds steady. The night deepens. And as you drift off, carried by the quiet endurance of countless nights, before this one, allow yourself to rest completely. Sweet dreams.